AOC I just happened to see tonight. She asked about the Epstein files, and she just declares that Epstein was a convicted child trafficker, which of course Epstein was not a convicted child trafficker.
It's a game of words you're playing there, Michael.
With that label,
you're playing a game right there. As part of the finding that Maxwell was guilty of those acts of trafficking and enticing minors for sex, there is a necessary finding by that jury that Epstein himself did it. Do you accept that Epstein trafficked minors for commercial sex?
I don't accept the construct of trafficking writ large at this point.
Do you contest that the overwhelming evidence suggests that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked minors for commercial sex?
I'm not willing to grant that at all. To whom did Epstein traffic minors for underage sex?
To himself.
If there were evidence that children had been on a large scale, then presumably that could be forthcoming, and that would be more than enough to satisfy me.
And by you mean evidence of forcible, not statutory? Because of course there's evidence of statutory. I'm trying to get beyond the statutes.
I don't know what grooming is anymore, frankly, so I don't know how to.
You don't have a concept of grooming?
I wouldn't, on my own volition or from my own first-person perspective, really describe anything as grooming at this point, other than a very straightforward case.
Strongly agree, strongly disagree, no opinion on the following. Ghislaine Maxwell should be pardoned.
I don't think it is justifiable for her to be sitting in prison at the moment.
All right, everyone can see you. How you doing, Michael? Good to catch you. You're a bit of a hot commodity at the moment.
I know, my face has been far too widely displayed recently on the internet.
And you've been making...
It should be redacted. It should be redacted, but like all the alleged victims.
Alleged victims. Well, we'll get into some of that.
I'm victimizing somebody out there just by my ubiquitous presence.
Yeah, well, why don't we just get started? Because you've made a bit of a splash, I'll say. Not just because of, I would say, your typical iconoclastic coverage of the Epstein files on substance, but also in sort of how you have, for lack of a better word, treated the purported victims of the Epstein case. And my goal to bring you on was...
Treated them? How?
Treated them, yes.
Do I have... I don't have any treatment that I can apply to them. I don't know what that means.
Treated in the context of like your word and rhetoric. That's been the criticism levied at you. I'm just, I think, reproducing it. And I don't think that's an unfair reproduction. Do you?
No, it's not unfair to say that people have objected to my depiction of this or that alleged victim on this or that occasion. Sure.
And so
anyway, I was being pedantic. I don't know why I objected to your use of the word treatment.
No worries. My goal in this conversation was to give you another opportunity to talk to my audience about what you're calling the Epstein maximalist mythology in your coverage. But also to, I think, talk a little bit about more in the weeds, some of the, these quote unquote, in your words, purported victims in the context of the Maxwell trial, and to try to get your take on exactly what has been corroborated and what has not been corroborated. But
Can I stop you for a second?
Sure,
I mean, I think it's bad practice to append a qualifier to a statement about somebody's alleged victimhood that hasn't been corroborated, or even in some cases in terms of what the DOJ has redacted over the course of these file productions or record productions. Not even has any attempt been made to do the barest verification of even one detail as to the alleged victimhood. So do you think it's inherently insulting for me to say alleged victim or purported victim, or even
I don't think so.
Victim, if I'm writing a text?
I don't think so. It's inherently, but I think it does signal, depending on who you're talking about, a disposition on one or more victims or purported victims, in which case people might object to that, which is to say the questioning of a particular victim and lumping them all in one.
I object to the disposition that says mere self-identification of a victim is sufficient to ascribe the label of victim, which is actually the literal criteria that has been employed by the DOJ to determine whom is entitled to have redactions imposed on their behalf on these records. I just don't think that's a workable standard.
I object to that standard as well, but why don't we start there?
So we have the same disposition.
Well, I just want to be clear. I don't think we have the same disposition on some of the purported victims, including those in the Maxwell trial, which I hope we'll get into. But why don't we start with terminology? Because I think you'll find some agreement with me on at least some of what the DOJ is doing in terms of gamesmanship on the quote unquote number of victims and what's going on there. And I most recently, in a Substack piece that you put out, this number that seems to keep getting bigger, if I'm honest with you, of 1,000 plus victims. So talk to us a little bit about terminology, and then also this the numerosity of the alleged victims.
Yeah, I don't remember if we discussed that highly dubious alleged total of alleged victims when we had a stream in July.
I think so. It was in the summer.
Yeah. But immediately when I read that now notorious July 6, 2025 DOJ FBI memo, I threw up some immediate red flags because on the one hand, in that memo, which launched the uproar that we're still embroiled in now as to the whole Epstein issue, in that memo, on the one hand, they were dispelling all the common planks of the Epstein mythology, right? So they declared, whoops, sorry, everybody. Turns out no client list, no predicate to charge any additional third-party individuals as co-conspirators, no wide-scale child trafficking ring, etc. But then they threw in this new, wildly inflammatory claim that Epstein, quote, harmed over 1,000 victims. And I would think that a skeptical reader, although not skeptical from the standpoint of this all must be a lie, the Epstein mythology must be 100% true, and this is just a cover-up, but like a rationally skeptical reader would have read that and thought to themselves, gee, if they're trying to convey here that they have obtained evidence after a thorough review that over 1,000 children were sexually abused by Epstein, why wouldn't they just say that? Why would they use this bizarre weasel wordage and say that over 1,000 victims were, quote, harmed? Because harm is not really the most legally precise term. That can mean a lot of things. And so I was always highly wary of that figure from the outset, and yet it's been repeated across the political spectrum and across the media ad nauseum.
It has been
a reflection of truth. I mean, actually, I think you and I might have. I remember you and I discussed an appearance by Speaker Mike Johnson on Meet the Press, where he recites this figure to underscore his revulsion toward Ghislaine Maxwell and to bolster his belief that Maxwell should never see the light of day. And, so Ro Khanna has like variously tried to revise the estimate upward to 1,200 alleged 1,200 victims. Has he? I'm sure he has.
Well, cited that figure at a very least.
Right. So on some level, yes, thank God for the Epstein files, because we have gotten some transparency and disclosure as it pertains to that number. And if you read my Substack from this past week, you'll know that according to internal FBI memoranda, that number is not a total of alleged victims. It's a number that's inclusive of alleged victims or purported victims. Sorry, I'm going to keep using that qualifier, and their family members, and we don't know who they're even counting among the family members that I guess have been victimized by Jeffrey Epstein. I'm sorry. Did he rape all the victims' fathers as well? Are we including uncles and cousins? They don't specify that criteria. And yet it's been used to grossly inflate this supposed number of victims and inflame this moral panic that I think you would have to agree at least on some level we're currently in the midst of.
No, undoubtedly.
And so that's just government propaganda.
I just want to say on a couple levels, undoubtedly in terms of the moral panic aspect to it, I think from every side of the political spectrum, you are seeing people's, the evidence of their claims, their claims are exceeding what is currently available on the evidence and sometimes outright refuted by it. And I want to real quick take a step back here. The figure that we're talking about is relates to a memo that was sent out sometime, I think in July. Was it July 6th? Sunday. It was like a Sunday sort of drop where an unsigned DOJ and FBI said basically case closed here. We're not, everything that's left is too salacious or whatever. We're not going to release, almost kind of reflexively implying as though people are demanding CSAM material be released. And it's in the course of that where I think your Substack makes the point, which I think is true, that if the goal was to try to, Officer Wiggum, nothing to see here, folks, probably not a good idea to, use that figure if what we mean by victims is something much broader, the set of community members affected in some way by their relationship to victims of Epstein, who are like more victims in the classical sense of actually having been sexually abused. But I'll let you respond to that.
And even of, so the figure is, I mean, they actually cite the precise number in the little footnote that is smuggled into this memoranda, where I happened to come across the explanation for the genesis of that figure. And it's something like 1,137, something like that. And even among the subset of that number that would be, in fact, alleged victim, as opposed to like some random sampling of their family members, the public is just never made aware that the majority of those alleged victims, as far as I can ascertain, would likely be alleged victims who were adults at the time of their claimed victimization. And yet we're told this is a giant pedophilia crisis, that there are just scores of child rapes that have been allowed to proliferate around the United States and go unpunished. Ryan Grimm repeated this claim, bizarrely enough, a few days ago. And I don't know. I just don't think that these distinctions have been made remotely clear to the general public. And that too has only served to foment a totally unconstrained mass hysteria and moral panic. When Pam Bondi testified before the House Judiciary Committee this week, and the entire media and social media went wild because of this protest that was done by alleged Epstein victims. If you see the photo that I did, because I missed it, I couldn't watch it in real time, but the first photo of it I happened across had it showed these women standing behind her somberly and doing their act of protest. And because, you know, I'm probably a little too well versed in
Yeah,
this
you
subject
annotated it with some typos, I might add. You got to watch that, Michael.
Did I? I probably did it too quickly.
Yeah.
But they were all the females in that photo were adults at the time of their claimed victimization. I could have gotten into even more detail. Like one of them, I think it's very highly likely, simply just hallucinated her entire experience with Epstein and Maxwell, meaning she is mentally ill by her own admission. She spent years in long-term psychiatric facilities. This is Liz Stein. She was just on some show I saw today that I didn't watch it yet, but she claims she realized that she was sexually trafficked in 1991 and 2019 after Epstein died. And she made claims such as that, you know, this is in one of her lawsuits that was filed in New York State, that a cable man visited her apartment and told her that Epstein and Maxwell were looking for her. I mean, it's like just quintessential mentally ill delusions. But this is somebody who has been treated as though she's just a fully verified, quote, survivor. Like she was conferring with Nancy Pelosi when I was at the Capitol in November. And it's just unbelievable that like not the slightest shred of corroborative inquiries ever done to substantiate even a smidgen of these people's claims. But even if we were to stipulate that they have legitimate claims as to them being victimized by Epstein or Maxwell,
these people meaning those specific
they were not
individuals.
Children. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
They were not. They were adults when they alleged that they were victimized. Now, do you think that is known, generally speaking, to the wider public?
Absolutely, absolutely not. But
isn't there a
there
journalistic
absolutely
failure
is
going
no
on right now?
I 100% believe that there is a journalistic failure going on right now, Michael. No doubt about that. And part of that, I think, is both really a problem of the journalists themselves, but of the sort of influencer class who take this kind of alt media role, and who, you know, supposedly we're supposed to be getting more influence-free journalism, hard-hitting journalism, whatever. And I think that is a problem in terms of reporting. In addition to, I think, some of our politicians, including Democrats, who I think have said things that are not substantiated. And I'll include among them some of my favorite politicians who say things like, we know that Trump engaged in, sexual abuse of a minor. I don't think that that's been corroborated whatsoever. But I want to separate, though.
Who are you referring to specifically?
I think AOC made a comment like that. I like AOC. I think other Democrats who have made something alluding to that. As I said,
I still haven't gotten a chance to watch that full Judiciary Committee hearing, but didn't Ted Lieu
He threw Merrick Garland under
reference.
the bus as well, and I thought that was inappropriate, and I thought that was horrible, and I wouldn't have done that either.
But didn't he reference this report that one of the FBI intake officers or agents took that alleges some kind of murder of a potential Epstein victim who was like kidnapped in Oklahoma or something?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
It's just some hallucinatory, crazed ramble that, like many other such rambles, was submitted to the FBI around the time of Epstein's arrest and death in 2019 and into 2020. And it's just standard operating procedure for the FBI to listen
write
to
a
any
report,
crank and memorialize what they reported. And of course, they're not conferring any truth value on these claims. And yet, when these Epstein files now get released in mass indiscriminately, people don't have the ability to distinguish when they're seeing what looks like an official document that it has this stern, text, and it's listing these wild incendiary allegations. And I guess it's understandable, like if a low information social media user sees something that floats across their feed and just assumes it to be true or reflecting the truth, like they don't have the context or they don't have the background knowledge to understand how to correctly interpret what they're seeing. But for Ted Lieu, I don't know if he's one of your favorite Democrats, for him to just recite this
and to throw Garland under the bus as well.
He's no better than your average freakish social media user.
Well, I think that it was also. I have no problem saying that Democrats, I think, have behaved irresponsibly on some of this stuff for sure. And I think throwing Merrick Garland under the bus and implying that Garland is part of a cover-up to, I don't know, protect child abusers, I think that is totally uncalled for and not.
But if there is a cover-up of some sort going on right now, how could Merrick Garland not have been party to it if he was presiding over?
Presumably, if he didn't know about it, I guess. But I'm not alleging that there is. So let's get to brass tacks, because you're not talking to an Epstein maximalist. I think you'd have to agree with that.
I got you. I'm just sort of like venting at some of just the alarmist insanity that's been allowed to promulgate almost entirely unrefuted.
So let's get to what we agree on in terms of the maximalist vision. Evidence that Epstein created sexual videos in order to blackmail people. You and I both agree that has not been substantiated, correct?
Well, not only has it not been substantiated, when the Trump administration came in January of 2025 and they ordered this review of the investigatory file, thanks to some of these new record releases, we now know what they were communicating amongst themselves over the course of conducting this review. And people always suspected, they must be conniving to redact Trump. And, look, I'm sure there might be some instances of that, just if only to insulate Trump from something that might be politically embarrassing. But
that would be corruption, wouldn't it? I mean, you would acknowledge that would be a political cover-up. You shrug your shoulders, but of course it would be, of course. Why would you be kind of whatever about it?
Well, I mean, I would have to see a precise example
if it were to occur, if it's a conditional, if it were
to have occurred, then yes, I would find it objectionable. But the main finding, which I said like a week ago, I would have loved to seen the look on Kash Patel and Dan Bongino's face when they got this email from Maureen Comey, who was tasked.
She was one of the main prosecutors in the Maxwell trial as well.
Correct. And of Epstein initially, before obviously that was terminated upon his death. But she was tasked with reviewing the case material in the possession of the Southern District of New York. And she reported up the chain of command, I guess maybe not technically the chain of command, but she reported upon request from the FBI to Kash Patel that after a comprehensive review of the files, some incredible findings were made that really dismantle the beating heart of core planks of the Epstein mythology. But I haven't seen this really widely reported much. I mean, there's been a handful of items here and there, but it really should be more emphasized, which is that she said, and I don't know, Democrats don't seem to be cognizant of this, because on the one, I thought they liked Maureen Comey, or I thought they were big defenders of James Comey. So they can't do the Republican talk.
You think Democrats are defenders of James Comey? No, but I think that applies to you too, because I happen to take objection with people who, for example, support firing Maureen Comey over this kind of shit. And I do think that like you need to be consistent in how you approach it. I'm going to take that back at you when we get to the Maxwell trial, though, because you are crediting Maureen
Okay,
Comey
yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of her finding there.
I'm not crediting her with anything. I'm just
Oh,
noting that she was the prosecutor who was most intensively involved in both the Epstein and
sure, and
Maxwell
would have more
prosecutions.
as an ambitious prosecutor
And
would
she's
have
reporting this.
and let's be clear about incentives here, folks. When it comes to prosecutors, they absolutely want to find the most salacious thing for their career. I have no doubt in my mind that if you are an AUSA or if you're working in the DOJ, you are an ambitious person who spent your entire career trying to get ahead, and there's no incentive just from a career perspective not to find that stuff. And so I have
not to ensure that they can marshal all possible evidence that could enable them to secure a conviction.
Yeah, and in some sense, I'm a person who oftentimes doubts these just so stories about the broader conspiracies within the Department of Justice. And so, yeah, I think that in order to allege that there's been a massive like manipulation of Maureen Comey, even why would they bring the case in the first place in 2019 against Epstein if on the basis of the Miami Herald reporting?
And so what does Maureen Comey say in this March 2025 email or memo of sorts to Kash Patel and the FBI higher ups? She says that they reviewed all the material that was seized from Epstein's devices in every property, I imagine, but definitely the New York property. And they found not a single video or image that depicted any sexual abuse at all. They depicted they found no CSAM or child pornography, as it used to be called. That
just don't say that a lot because we'll get demonetized. But CSAM would be preferred. But just we know what you're talking about. Yeah, they found some, but not.
Well, they found 10 or 15. They found 10 or 15 CSAM images that they say had been downloaded off the internet. Now, look, people, I'm not defending legitimate, violating CSAM or like CSAM that genuinely is harmful to the children that are depicted, but CSAM can include lots of different things, and so we don't even know among the 10 or 15 images.
Do you doubt that it's lascivious content? Do you doubt that it's?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Appealing to a prurient interest.
Neither do you. I mean, nobody knows because we haven't seen it. Not that I would like make a strong effort to view it. Okay. But like, we just simply don't know. I mean, the criteria for what constitutes CSAM is incredibly broad. And, I pulled up a court ruling or a decision that, governs how the government designates what CSAM is. And CSAM can depict persons under 18 who are fully clothed. It just depends on like what the context is. But anyway, we don't have to get hung up on that.
Yeah, sure. I think
the major point is no sexual abuse depicted at all, and no sexually explicit material featuring any purported victim, and no child sexual abuse material that was self-produced by Epstein. Now, I'm sorry. If that were widely known over the course of how this Epstein mythology has been propagated, it would have been a big problem. Like, it's pretty contrary to what just the prevailing assumptions have been, is it not?
And say that in two sentences. Can you give the mythology in 2 sentences about what the overall narrative is? As best
the mythology, I define it as having originated with the December 30th, 2014 motion for joinder by Virginia Roberts Gouffre over the course of this litigation around the Crime Victims' Rights Act, which is sort of a pernicious statute to begin with, but that's a whole nother issue. Where she, or rather Bradley Edwards and Paul Cassell, allege on her behalf, and by the way, Bradley Edwards has been intimately involved in crafting this legislation, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, in concert with Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, frantically demanding in federal courts that efforts be taken to ensure the maximum possible redactions and concealment of records. So on the one hand, they prance around, he and the alleged victims, trying to make it seem like they're the most vociferous proponents of full disclosure and transparency. But behind the scenes, when they're writing these crazed letters to federal judges, they're actually demanding the fewest possible record disclosures and the least possible transparency. Bradley Edwards on February 2nd actually demanded in a letter to Judge Berman and Engelmeyer that
in the SDNY.
the DOJ that the DOJ remove the entire Epstein files archive because it contained far too much disclosure and transparency, and I don't know, possibly might complicate his ongoing litigation for a few $100 million more that he's trying to extract from Bank of America and Bank of New York. Although the Bank of New York component of that was just dismissed by Engelmeyer. Anyway, go.
Yeah, no. Okay, so let's get two sentences of the mythology, and then let's get to places where I think we're going to diverge.
The mythology, it doesn't originate with the Palm Beach prosecution. Okay, so from 2006 to 2008, when there was a federal intercession in what had previously been since 2005, the local Palm Beach police investigation of Epstein resolved through the now infamous non-prosecution agreement. He then serves 13 months in the custody of the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office, etc. Like that's obviously a major component of this entire tale. But in terms of what the mythology is that I'm referring to, that comes later. That comes by way of Virginia Roberts Gouffre, who's represented by Bradley Edwards, and who puts in this motion for joinder that she was victimized by what she says was the sprawling child sex trafficking operation orchestrated by Epstein, that was enforced via blackmail, or that produced, voluminous blackmail materials that ensnared all manner of prominent people, such as a generic category, she says, of prime ministers and princes and politicians, but then also she specifies Dershowitz, Prince Andrew, and Jean-Luc Brunel. Okay, so that's the genesis of the Epstein mythology. Obviously, it's morphed over time. It's taken on different features, just like any mythology would, or like any kind of like world religion would. I mean, this really does sort of function like a world religion now, or a secular religion in a very perverse way. But that's the mythology, more or less. And people have added more recently, like the blackmail must have been directed by this or that intelligence service,
Mossad or CIA.
Enjoyed suggesting Israel as the culprit, etc. But that's the crux of the mythology, and that is just flatly undermined by a number of the pertinent findings that one can glean from this latest Epstein files production as of January 30th, such as that Epstein was found to have produced no child abuse material at all, and actually nothing in his possession depicted any sexual abuse whatsoever. So I don't know. I think that's worth knowing if we're going to have a perpetual moral panic and mass hysteria, don't you?
I absolutely agree with that. And I think, frankly, that people ought be skeptical about not just what the government says, but also what some of these purveyors of, I think, conspiracies are trying to sell them. And I should be worried about that 100%. However, and I hope that you agree, you're not speaking to someone who affirms that notion. I'm skeptical of that notion of the mythology. You go too far, Michael. Michael, you go too far.
I'm sure many of your listeners.
Sure, they're pissed off.
Probably,
yes, they're pissed off. But you go too far.
So are they pissed off? Are they pissed off at you, or they're only pissed
both
off
of us?
Like when you interact
both of
with
us.
Me? Okay, good.
We'll give you your opportunity. I think because you've been, unfairly maligned by people as yourself having done some criminal acts. I think that's totally inappropriate. I think that's uncalled for, and I think that there's value in having a skeptical journalist on top of stuff. But you go too far
for a second. If I was actually trying to hide some depraved sexual motive of my own, or cover up my own trail of child crimes, or if I was personally a pedophile, do you think it would be wise for me to be so out front on this particular issue? Like, does that just make sense on its face? Anyway, obviously, nothing you can really say will refute those allegations. If people want to malign you with these obviously ridiculous imputations of some kind of foul sexual intent, they're not going to be dissuaded of it through like rational argumentation, but it does give some insight into why there is so little genuine journalistic skepticism of this story, because who wants to deal with the onslaught of defamatory slime? Only you.
No, but I understand that it's a cost of what you're doing, and that's why I think that people should listen to you. In terms of, anytime there's a narrative that contradicts what people already think that they know, I think it's useful to examine it, because it often, takes some price or some cost for the person purveying it to, come to that conclusion. And then put it out for the people to consume. But you go too far, and here's where I think you go too far. The first thing.
Can I?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Just to give you. So I'm just going to give you a kind of a random little data point that I just happened to come across today because I was reading some new material. But this is just something that would behoove people to know, but of course is never going to be made widely known, even though it's technically in the new quote unquote Epstein files, and it's something that I had been looking for some time, but wasn't able to locate, but happens to be in this latest production. Okay, so there was a deposition in 2010. Nope. Oh, well, I have been looking for that as well, but I'm referring to something different. And maybe this was publicly available somewhere. I just couldn't happen to find it. But there was a 2010 deposition by Joseph Carey, who was the detective in the Palm Beach police who did a lot of the initial interviews of potential victims in the Palm Beach phase starting in fall of 2005. And he's asked, so if the people that you interview, if the girls that you interviewed had all been above the legal age of consent in Florida, which is 18, would their activity with Epstein all have been regarded as consensual activity among adults? Because he had acknowledged when asked that there were also some potential victims that he had located and interviewed who were above the age of 18, and he discounted them as potential victims because they were above the legal age of consent, but the conduct was virtually identical, according to Ricciardi, in terms of girls who might have been 17 or 16, etc. So all the conduct, according to the police detective who was the most aggressive about trying to establish a case against Epstein in that initial Palm Beach investigatory phase, he himself said that none of the conduct was non-consensual, but for a particular girl being 17 as opposed to 18. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily should have insulated Epstein from any and all potential criminal culpability for anything. I'm just saying it's definitely a clarifying detail as to the severity of the criminal conduct that people just assume must have taken place. Like AOC, I just happened to see tonight, was in Germany for whatever reason. I guess she went to the Munich Security Conference and she was speaking to a bunch of students or young people, and she was asked about the Epstein files, and she just declares that Epstein was a convicted child trafficker, hence why it's so abominable that so many people would have associated with him afterwards, which of course Epstein was not a convicted child trafficker. But when she
it's a game of words you're playing there, Michael.
With that label,
you're playing a game right there.
No, not really, because when she describes the alleged conduct of Epstein that led to his conviction in hyperbolic terms,
it's not hyperbolic at all.
That makes people.
That's not hyperbolic. The statement that he trafficked, the statement that he trafficked minors for sex, for commercial sex. She said he was a convicted sex trafficker. He was not a convicted sex trafficker. He was convicted of 2 prostitution charges. No doubt about that. But Maxwell was convicted, and as part of the finding of Maxwell's conviction,
she's talking about Epstein.
I understand that she was talking about Epstein, no doubt. But as part of the finding that Maxwell was guilty of those acts of trafficking and enticing minors for sex, there is a necessary finding by that jury that Epstein himself did it. And you are playing games when you say, well, he's not convicted. They found it. It's a ruling on the merits that Epstein trafficked children. And of course he did, Michael. But I think that you would fight back against that.
He was dead. Of course.
No.
I don't accept that at all.
No, so you don't accept that Epstein trafficked minors for commercial sex.
Not that he was convicted of it.
I'm not saying that he was convicted. That a court in the process of this jury finding, that of course tantamount to the prosecution's theory of the case is that in some sense Maxwell is an accessory to Epstein. Of course, the jury can't find that Maxwell.
That's not what AOC. That's not what AOC.
She's not a lawyer. You're playing a game with the conviction term.
Yeah. Tell me about it. I mean, I'm not a lawyer either, but like I do try to be precise if I'm going to trumpet claims of who was convicted of what child sex trafficking crimes, because the point that she was trying to make in this appearance was that look how heinous it is that Howard Lutnick turns out to have gone to the island and brought his family in 2015 after Epstein had been convicted of child trafficking crimes. So she's referring to the 2008 convictions.
Well, I understand
that. The Maxwell conviction came in 2021.
No doubt about that. But now knowing what we know about going back and
is there no obligation for anybody in the public arena to just be like minimally diligent about the fact record?
I think that this is. Can we just back up a little bit and talk about the nature of that statement and why it's such a faux pas in your mind? I mean, so let's start first with like the base facts. Do you accept that Epstein trafficked minors for commercial sex?
I don't accept the construct of trafficking writ large at this point.
And
it's so nebulous.
Okay,
it's so nebulous.
So by nebulous, you mean you don't know what it is? It's undecipherable to you?
No, I know. I know what it's claimed to be per the various federal trafficking statutes.
So in what sense is it nebulous?
So subject to prosecutorial discretion.
Well, I mean,
where they can fit a pattern of fact into one of these trafficking rubrics, according to whomever or whatever they would like to charge, that it's no longer anything like a coherent concept anymore. So,
it's coherent. You can
Maureen Comey learned that the hard way when Diddy was acquitted on the sex trafficking charges that she brought against him.
So let's talk about it. So sex trafficking is not coherent. In other words, I understand coherent to mean you don't understand what it is. It's undecipherable. Not that someone with prosecutorial discretion, like for example, you can think of someone who, like, if a police charges disorderly conduct, maybe you say that that's so like indecipherable. What does disorderly conduct mean? That's a different, or it gives too much power to the prosecution. That's different than saying it's incoherent.
The concept of trafficking no longer refers to a coherent and predictable and understandable and consistent set of facts, such that I dismiss it as conceptually incompatible with any kind of like rational apprehension of anything anymore. I'll just give you like one quick example because I'm writing something on this that hasn't come out yet, but there was a court case in Massachusetts where guys who had been convicted of trafficking appealed their convictions up to the appellate state level court. And what did the state of Massachusetts charge these men with trafficking for? They charged them with trafficking after a police decoy posted some ads on some app advertising sexual escort type services from a young woman and put in the ad, call this number for a sexy time. And like a handful of guys call the number and agree to meet the fake police decoy escort at a hotel. And then once they arrive at the hotel, they're busted and arrested. They were charged with trafficking, sex trafficking. So that just goes to show you how
coherent it is as a concept. I mean, it could be elastic, doesn't mean it's not coherent. And if you keep using the term incoherent, it's going to be a problem for us because it seems like you can understand it.
It was found incoherent by the appellate court because they actually had dismissed those charges.
Wait, just because by virtue of the fact that it was dismissed doesn't mean that it's incoherent. I can understand it. Perhaps it's an extension of the jurisdiction of the state of Massachusetts if it was charged. I don't know the specific case you're talking about, but I can cognize what trafficking is. And more specifically, in this case, in the Maxwell case, in the Epstein case, I mean, all of the elements of trafficking here seem pretty clear to me, and we can walk through them. I mean, it doesn't seem indecipherable.
I strongly disagree, and I'll give you one example. So, in order to establish trafficking, right, there has to be some kind of interstate nexus. I mean, it depends because there are different trafficking statutes. There's the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, which has been broadened and further codified over the years, but generally speaking, there has to be some element of interstate commerce, right? So
yeah, that's an Article 1 problem, that you have to use a channel instrumentality of interstate commerce, and that just like sort of speaks to the extent of congressional authority.
And do you know what the instrument? And do you know what
it can be? It can be something as trivial as internet using an American bank account. It can be, and this has been upheld.
Do you know what it was in the Maxwell trial?
No, there are multiple. There were multiple in the Maxwell trial.
Do you know what the marquee piece of evidence was that was cited?
I don't know. How about the flights? The flights between states? There were flights between states.
That wasn't the key instrument of interstate commerce that was alleged.
You're talking about the Palm Beach. You're talking about the Palm Beach prosecution.
I'm talking about the Maxwell trial of 2021.
Okay, what are you characterizing as a marquee?
Well, the prosecutors rolled out as a physical exhibit to display to the jurors, like in the courtroom, a massage table. And they told the jurors that this massage table was an instrument of interstate commerce, not because they could even establish that the massage table was transited by Maxwell across any state lines, but because the table was originally manufactured in the state of California and was used in the state of Florida. That's the That's the instrument.
I don't know if you're. I mean, you sound a little bit like a Heritage Foundation guy right now, because I don't know if you're caught up on the Commerce Clause jurisprudence of the Supreme Court. There's this case called Gonzalez v. Raich, where a person solely growing marijuana.
Marijuana.
Yes,
yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
So you might take an issue with how far the court has gone, from Wickard v. Filburn all the way to Gonzalez v. Raich and all that shit. But that really isn't about the decipherability of the statute. That's just like your own take on whether or not the Commerce Clause has gone too far in these crimes that should be limited to another jurisdiction.
It's my take on how arbitrary the elements of trafficking statute violations can be when prosecutors want to creatively concoct a certain case.
What you're pointing to is an issue of federalism.
It's not about some larger issue really around the Commerce Clause.
No, it is. When you say it's so ridiculous, how can this be a channel or instrumentality of interstate commerce? Well, because the Supreme Court has held that even like trivial things that affect directly interstate commerce can be. But the thing is,
I realize that.
Yeah, but the contention doesn't speak to whether
it's
or not
totally arbitrary. Which is why I find the concept of trafficking as a legal construct to be increasingly
but you could say that about any statute which uses this jurisdictional hook in the statute. For example, there are CSAM statutes that will use, in or affecting interstate or foreign commerce. There's nothing improper if Congress is going through, and these statutes are all subject to judicial review, with them just, using the powers that they have, according to the Supreme Court, to criminalize some conduct. And crucially, it doesn't speak to whether the act itself is understandable, just because you can think of how a prosecution might wield it sort of maliciously. It doesn't say anything about that. And it's really just your take on the Commerce Clause jurisprudence, not about the coherence of trafficking as such. You agree with that or not?
No, I would maintain that it's more about the coherence of trafficking as such. Obviously, if you wanted, you could broaden it out into a more theoretical discussion about Commerce Clause jurisprudence writ large, but one need not do that in order to make the more specific argument I'm making now as to the growing and I think absurd elasticity of trafficking as it's conceived by prosecutors. And it's a very useful tool for them to create what they call conspiracies, which I think I remember talking to you last time is very much something that prosecutors favor because it's just such an expansive concept and it's very much determined by a prosecutor's whim. So I'll give you another example of how absurd the trafficking construct has become. Like when Harvey Weinstein was sued civilly by a woman who claimed that she was sexually victimized by him because they were attending the Cannes Film Festival one year, and he invited her to her hotel room, and she claimed that something sexually untoward happened at the hotel room. A federal judge found that she could bring a claim of trafficking against Harvey Weinstein, where the facts at issue are her going to his hotel room and then something sexually improper allegedly happening because the judge found a thing of value was exchanged insofar as Weinstein allegedly suggested to this woman that he could help her get movie roles. Now, I'm sorry, if trafficking is broadened so radically beyond what would have been conceived to be when these statutes were originally passed, then I'm sorry, I have to just insist that it's, yes, incoherent. When the TVPA was passed in 2000, and you go look at like the statements that were made by the sponsors of the bill, the legislative history, what Bill Clinton said when he signed it, it was contemplated as putting a new tool in the federal law enforcement arsenal to crack down on like literal mass organized sex enslavement. But
the statute isn't limited in its terms to those situations. I mean, it just is the case that the language of the statutes is broader. And no, the statute says it, right? The statute says to engage in a commercial sex act. What you described with Weinstein there, I don't know the facts of that case specifically. That's prostitution, right? You might not believe that it's plausible that in the case that you're citing that it was in fact prostitution. But if someone says
exactly, I agree.
Okay, but then that's not a problem with this.
Everything that would have been commonly understood to constitute prostitution like 10 or 15 years ago is now reflexively assumed, especially by prosecutors and also in the political domain, as trafficking. So, for
in
example,
some cases, by definition. In some cases, by definition.
I don't agree that there's a static definition that's just somehow being accessed.
18 USC 1591. That's
that
what
people in the year 2000 couldn't access.
Wait, no. I'm saying the people of the United States, through their Congress, enacted statutes, and in those statutes, they determined that certain prostitution acts constitute trafficking. Now, you might say, "I wish it weren't that way. I wish that prostitution weren't sometimes defined as trafficking," but it just is. And the case that we have of Maxwell is so clear. It's like in what you would expect.
Contemporaneously, in 2000, when this federal statute was passed, as far as I've been able to ascertain, no one suggested that this new trafficking statute could be used to encompass activity as simple as a, quote, John patronizing a prostitute. Like, there were already statutes on the books that could criminalize that conduct if it wanted to be criminalized by a prosecutor, right? So no, I just don't agree that, like, just because that act was passed and it has been so radically broadened in its interpretation over the years to fit the needs or whims of prosecutors, that means it's just like this.
Let me just define it.
Quality that trafficking is.
Let's just read the statute. This is the statute. 18 USC section 1591, sex trafficking.
You got to go to the original version, though. Go to the one that.
Wait, why would I?
It's been revised. It's been revised
since 2019.
It's been revised since 2000.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the one as enacted when it was charged against Ghislaine Maxwell. That's when you would have to claim, like, presumably you would think that, or you're saying that the conduct is going back to the 90s and it wouldn't encompass commercial sex acts and that the revisions don't include commercial sex acts? I don't think that that's true because that's what they argue.
The trafficking statutes writ large, to my mind, unduly empower the state to criminalize conduct and assert it as some element of a broader conspiracy that is way too deferential to the punitive powers of the state and has resulted in conduct that would have been almost universally perceived as something much more anodyne, or let's say something much less radical and extreme and like frightening, meaning like a prostitution charge. It's been repurposed and reframed and recast as something much more on its face sinister to the average hearer of the news that somebody's been indicted for a trafficking offense. And I think that is bad as a value judgment that I'm personally, now making, because it is extremely susceptible to being manipulated and to foment mass panics and moral panics and mass hysterias, such as we're now seeing today on steroids. I mean, there was a reason why Epstein pleaded guilty to 2 prostitution charges. There was a reason why, when some of the early litigation, civil litigation, was brought against Epstein around that same period, 2008, 2009, 2010, the alleged victims, who were Jane Does in that initial series of lawsuits, self-described their own conduct vis-a-vis Epstein as prostitution. But, today, it would be unthinkable that anything that ever a victim was party to could be characterized as prostitution, because then you're somehow maligning the alleged victim.
Well, I just want to be clear, whether or not
I just don't think that cultural and legal and political shift has been a positive one.
Well, can we put your normative? I think you're entitled to have your normative opinion about these statutes. Absolutely. Can we put aside your normative conclusions for a second?
Sure.
As defined by Congress and as interpreted and understood by the courts, do you contest that the overwhelming evidence suggests that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked minors for commercial sex?
I'm not willing to grant that at all. To whom did Epstein traffic minors for underage sex?
To himself.
He trafficked. So it was a trafficking conspiracy of one. I guess.
Wait, no.
After the fact.
Hang on. So conspiracy is different. Conspiracy is different. Conspiracy is an agreement.
That's what he was charged with.
No,
that's what he was charged with.
Understood. My question for you wasn't what was he charged with. I do think that he conspired with Maxwell, 100%. But putting that aside, do you have any doubt that he trafficked, regardless of conspiracy?
Look, if prosecutors really want, they can charge almost anything under the sun as trafficking. So sure,
they couldn't charge you with trafficking. They couldn't charge you with trafficking.
Well, no, not me, because well, if there's any like even hint of a fact pattern that could suggest some like somebody being transited or like somebody having their movements facilitated for the purpose of some potential sex act, no matter how.
What would it take for you to grant it? What would I have to show you?
I mean, I'm sorry if this is obstinate.
It is obstinate because I'm putting aside your normative view.
Well, I think justifiably so. I just don't grant anything to do with trafficking as a legal construct anymore.
So you don't even
so chronically misused.
Wait. Putting aside your normative view about whether it's been misused, you're saying you won't even entertain the hypotheticals relating to trafficking? Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, I'll entertain all the hypotheticals you want, but I'm not gonna grant anything.
You won't even grant what it would take for you to be convinced that he was trafficked? What would it take? What kind of evidence?
I'm not convinced that these statutes are useful, are worthy at all.
And thus, you won't answer the hypothetical, correct?
No, I mean, because like if you had asked me, do I grant that Diddy was trafficked anyone? I would have said, wait. I mean, and this was before he was acquitted. I would have probably said something like, well, I don't know. It really needs to be tested to see if the elements of this alleged trafficking conspiracy are actually at all valid, and if they comport with what a reasonable person would understand to have been trafficking, which granted can really go way beyond the contours of what had been understood as trafficking like 10 or 15 years ago. But nonetheless, we should actually do a thorough evaluation of the evidence before I'm willing to stipulate that up front.
But the question is conditional.
I think I would have been vindicated in my reluctance to.
I know, but the question is conditional.
Acquitted, right?
At this point, I want to know what kind of evidentiary burden these maximalists need to rise to. Like, what would they need to show you for you to be convinced that he was trafficking children as understood, or sorry, I should say minors, as understood by the statute? And it sounds
that's a good way of reframing it, because like I could be convinced in the maximalist theories, I suppose, or at least components of the theories, with or without the invocation of the term trafficking. Because like if you could show me, as Ryan Grimm posited, or he was amplifying something from Whitney Webb from 2020 that he claimed has been dramatically shown to be true, and how awesomely prescient was she to have declared as some kind of fact claim in April of 2020 that Leslie Wexner financed an operation that resulted in the trafficking and mass of thousands of American children. Like, if you could give me, like, it should be theoretically
I'm not speaking to Grimm though, but we have the Maxwell trial.
I'm responding to your question of how I could be convinced in the validity of some of the planks of a more maximalist interpretation of what Epstein did, right?
I mean, I meant with respect to trafficking.
I could imagine being convinced if like there was any evidence ever produced that there was mass scale of children. Like, in theory, there could be evidence establishing such a thing, right? But there just isn't.
Putting aside rape,
but if there were, I would have to be amenable. I strive to be rational, open to new evidence, etc. And I could imagine evidence being furnished that could give credence to that statement. But that doesn't. But we don't necessarily have to shoehorn that into this ever-expansive concept of, quote, trafficking, which can constitute like John's going to a police decoy in Massachusetts, or somebody going to Harvey Weinstein's hotel room and at the Cannes.
So let me give you hypotheticals. So suppose that Epstein, suppose that you believe Jane as part of the Maxwell trial. Suppose that you believed her, and Epstein was paying in cash.
Naughty of Yorland.
Yeah. Suppose that you.
Let's use their real name. So, like, I mean, I just reject that we have to perpetually conceal the names of adults in their like late 30s forevermore. When, if we're gonna be beset with this moral panic and mass hysteria, I think it's more than warranted to have all the available facts at the ready to discuss in detail, rather than playing this little game where we have to walk on eggshells and not ever divulge any, quote, victim identifying information, which is what is governing the DOJ's redaction.
Do you mind me using the term, James? Does that bother you? Will that be a sticking point?
I mean, you can't. Why would you want to use the word why would you want to use a pseudonym? I mean, we know who she is.
It's just easier for me to say. It's what's referenced in the trial. I'm just asking if you have a problem with it, regardless of my reason for it.
I mean, I don't have so much of a problem with it that I would be like vehemently denouncing you for doing so. I just think it's a bit silly.
Okay.
And unnecessary, and unnecessarily like obfuscates a critical element of this whole issue. And I thought we're all about opposing any obfuscation as to the
at this
issue of
point, I think that
Jeffrey
there's a
Epstein.
public at this point, I think there's a public interest to with respect to names and stuff that, and they've already, frankly, it's all very searchable and easy to find anyway. And so, to the extent that there was any public interest in it, I think, any interest in them, it's been obviated by the public interest in making sure that all these claims are thoroughly vetted, et cetera, et cetera. But I just want to be clear, like, it seems like you have a problem with the notion of like covering up names at all in like any case. And
I just thought we all agreed that we were in favor of disclosure and transparency vis-a-vis Epstein. Hence the clamor for the release of all the Epstein files. And I don't remember really anyone ever clarifying that when they were demanding the release of Epstein files, they actually were demanding giant sweeping exceptions that were going to necessarily
it's in the law. It's in the law.
I know it was. Well, it's what's in the law. The law simply authorizes Bondi to withhold victim identifying information. It doesn't require her to do so. And it doesn't even really spell out the criteria for what would constitute victim identifying information.
Sure, but the people's house.
That definition became clarified when the victim lawyers started petitioning frantically federal judges to require the most expansive possible redactions.
That's fine. I'm just acknowledging
did people not realize that if we're talking about criminal investigative files, that's necessarily going to include lots of files that are intertwined with, to quote the DOJ FBI memo, information that pertains to alleged victims? Like, what do people think the prosecutors were investigating?
Whatever they might think about, it distilled that way, the people's house, Congress, overwhelming majorities, passed the laws with exceptions in there. And so, as understood in our democratic progress, voluntary exceptions, but clearly with the eye towards that being done. Otherwise, why would they put that in there? And, you might have a difference of opinion there. And I certainly don't want it to be a stopping point here. I'm not going to object.
That's why I criticized the legislation before it was passed.
Sure. Listen, I've had my critiques of the legislation. I think that it is both at once commands maximal disclosure, but also creates these seemingly contradictory exceptions that allow a lot of play on the joints and a lot of claims that would almost keep this in the news no matter what.
And I'll just say, it is true. It is true that there was a time. They've been removing files like at rapid fire at the because of the demands of these victims, quote unquote, purported victims and their lawyers. Where there was a filing like last week where Jay Clayton, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, says that these 6 law firms that we're conferring with who represent purported victims have, after January 30th, started informing us of brand new alleged victims that now we have to go back in and redact files on the behalf of. And of course, they're not doing any vetting whatsoever to determine whether the claimed victimization is at all valid. It could just be totally made up, and they expressly say that they'll take on its face any claim of victimization.
Just by virtue of it being said. And I think they were doing
by virtue of it being declared.
Yeah. No, I mean, you and I agree with that. So let's stick with what we know. And I was about to get into a hypothetical, which was, suppose that a claim is made by a purported victim that at the age of 14, and suppose you believe the claim. All right, that's the other supposition. That at the age of 14, every 2 or so weeks, this person was being flown out to touch Mr. Epstein's penis, to fondle Miss Maxwell's breasts, and in exchange, given money for such things, travel to New York, travel to New Mexico, and also in Florida, if you believe those claims were true and in fact accurate. A, would you describe it as prostitution of a minor? And B, would you think that you'd be convinced that it was trafficking of a minor?
I would have ethical objections to that if that were true. I would need more information to know how strenuous my ethical objection would be. So, for example, was there contemporaneous evidence that, stipulating that this happened? And again, even just if what you laid out did happen, it's already objectionable on some level. But there are gradations of how objectionable an act is. And I would want to know, for instance, is there any indicia of contemporaneous harm that was inflicted on the 14-year-old as a result of this? Because that
suppose
would
there's
make
not.
It more severe. That would make it more severe.
Suppose, and in retrospect, the person who was 14 years old at the time says, "I actually really enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it." would you agree that those acts, notwithstanding her pleasant, fond, like looking back fondly, would you grant that that was prostitution of a minor and trafficking of a minor, notwithstanding her positive feelings?
Prostitution? I don't know that I would call it prostitution. Again, I don't know exactly what criminal statute it would necessarily it could be chargeable under. But speaking as to my own personal individual just normative reaction to that, yeah, I would find that normatively, at the very, very least, highly suspect, inadvisable, objectionable, perhaps incredibly foul and malicious if additional details were filled in demonstrating that. But
what if it was
I don't know,
penetration, penis into vagina? If that were the case of a child, would that be prostitution in your mind? It seems like it's an unmeetable bar. No, I'm not asking whether it's objectionable. I assume that you think it's all objectionable, and that's what I think that you've already said, that it's all objectionable, that you think it's disabled. I'm not asking that, to be clear. I'm asking whether or not you think it would be child prostitution.
Because what's the quintessential prostitution sort of fact pattern?
Money for sex.
John patronizing a, what people would have called, I'm not saying hooker to be pejorative, but like something in that area, in that vein, in terms of like what the popular conception would be. And this seems like something else. And this characterizes, I think, a lot of the definitional ambiguity around a lot of the Epstein case, because I don't know that the term prostitution really captures a lot of what the alleged victims,
whether it does or not, would it be
thing or an escort thing or something more informal or less?
I know, but I'm giving you a hypothetical. I'm giving you a hypothetical in which a
would I call that prostitution? No, necessarily. I don't think so.
Now this is. I'm granting it that it's
enticement, maybe like enticement of a minor, like something.
What would it need to be prostitution at that point, right? Like you're paying money for sex from a minor. How is that not prostitution? Assuming you believe those facts,
because it's not necessarily like a direct like one-to-one financial transaction.
Assume
right?
It is.
It could be the case that like maybe certain amenities are provided for the 14-year-old over the course of her taking these trips or visiting the people that she's engaging in sex acts with, but it's not as though like a sex act is performed and then some cash is handed over. Right?
No, so this is what I'm describing the fact pattern that you believe in this hypothetical, which is Epstein brings over 14-year-old. Epstein, knowing what he's doing, gives money to 14-year-old, says, "Here's $100," and then has sex with her. And Epstein knows that the money is a but-for cause. It's necessary to get the sexual activity, and that's why he's doing it.
I guess part of me just thinks it's unfortunate that somebody in that position would be labeled as a prostitute. Like, it seems almost a bit too pejorative. Like, I know that, so the girl that Epstein pleaded guilty to procuring as a minor for prostitution in the Florida case, like the 17-year-old, she's very aberrational in this entire universe of purported Epstein victims, as far as I've been able to tell. In that, I've read all her testimony. She testified before the grand jury. She gave a fairly lengthy interview to the Palm Beach police that's on video. People could go watch it. And she's always struck me as like eminently credible, well-adjusted, not clearly not like overtly attempting to embellish or dramatize anything. She just seems like 100% credible to me in her account of what occurred. And she ended up being the sole minor whom Epstein pleaded guilty to procuring as a minor for prostitution, because she said that she had consensual intercourse with Epstein literally the day before her 18th birthday. There had been some incrementally escalating sexual contact prior to that when she was 17, but the statute was really satisfied when there was intercourse, which was somewhat unusual for Epstein. But he did.
Yeah, why wouldn't you grant that was prostitution and she was a prostitute when she did that?
Because it seems too.
That's what he was convicted of. That's what he agreed to plead guilty to.
I know. Like statutorily, yeah, I guess it does constitute prostitution. I guess maybe just more colloquially, I have some reservations about summarily labeling her as a prostitute, because it just seemed like it was a bit more of a nebulous type of situation to me. So I don't know. I don't think that in other words, I guess I just more on an ethical level. I just don't think that she owes to be, you know, consigned with the label of prostitute.
I guess what I'm describing is like the act of prostitution, which, as I understand it, is sex for money, and anyone who engages
or a thing
in
of value now,
or a thing of, but you would have to grant that, right? I mean, do you really think that there, like, if you use Bitcoin, it shouldn't count as prostitution? Clearly, there's some like.
No, I mean that's
money's fungible, and
it has nothing to do with the form of currency. It's just that, like, okay, so a sugar daddy type relationship, let's say that's consensual. So there are websites like Seeking Arrangement and so forth where this happens all the time. You know, I was just commenting a few days ago that it seems perfectly plausible to me that if an enterprising prosecutor really wanted to, he could begin charging this as either prostitution or trafficking. Right? I would be shocked if this hasn't been contemplated already, because things of value are exchanged in this somewhat transactional, but also consensual, and maybe, genuine enjoyment is also derived from it on some level. Like, it's complicated, right? Not everything in life is black and white. Sorry to use a cliche, but so I just don't know that I would be comfortable just declaring, as we sit here, that anybody who engages in some kind of transactional sex relationship that does involve exchanges of things of value, perhaps even just straight cash at some time at certain points, but maybe, I don't know, you pay for a vacation, you pay for a flight, you pay for meals. A lot could be roped into this pretty broad category. And so, no, I wouldn't just say that anybody in a sugar daddy, it's not my cup of tea, but I wouldn't be willing to just declare here and now as a general principle that anybody who ever partakes in that is either a prostitute or.
Well, my hypothetical wasn't a sugar daddy relationship. It was more like a thing of value directly in exchange for sex. Now, you can make a question, and how much attenuation is allowed before you get into these unclear places. I wouldn't grant that all of those relationships probably are legal under the law. And listen, I might even have problems with the authority that a lot of prosecutors have already. And I'm not saying that I'm like in support of all these regimes.
We agree there.
But all I'm trying to tell you is, I think, even though I appreciate a lot of the skepticism, which I agree that journalists have been far too, derelict in their duty, I think that your standard is impossibly high with respect to some of even the things that are, convicted of. You take issue with characterizing Epstein's one, victim that you characterize as being a prostitute, even though that's what he was convicted of. It seems that you think that he got a raw deal, and even for those areas, you won't even grant it.
I don't understand how my standard is impossibly high. I just offer to you a standard whereby countervailing evidence could dispel me of my views, which is that if there were evidence, leave aside prostitution as a legal construct, leave aside trafficking. If there were evidence that children had been raped on a large scale, then presumably that could be forthcoming, and that would be more than enough to satisfy me that my basic understanding of this Epstein matter has been faulty.
And by you mean forcible, not statutory.
We're being told that we're in the midst of the biggest pedophilia crisis that's ever afflicted humankind, essentially.
And by you mean evidence of forcible, not statutory? Because, of course, there's evidence of statutory.
There's evidence of statutory sexual misconduct. I don't know about, I guess it depends how you define it. But if we're talking about like forcible intercourse or penetration, not quite as much evidence of that, but some sexual contact, sure. And look, I mean, that's why Epstein was very aggressively investigated by the feds when they interceded in that Palm Beach case. And that's how they came up with this resolution where you'd have to plead guilty to 2 state level charges, register for life as a sex offender, agree to a civil restitution mechanism where he would waive any ability to contest claims against him by the 30 or so government designated victims who hadn't been adjudicated as such, unlike the one girl who was 17 when she had the consensual encounter. But nonetheless, the feds wanted
and
to
the 3 others in federal court against Maxwell, which you want to ignore. Why? Because he wasn't the defendant there?
Four others.
Well, I'm not going to characterize.
Are you discounting one?
Well, the one that I'm discounting in terms of sexual abuse or is where the one who she went to New Mexico, and under the laws of New Mexico.
Oh, really?
Well, hang on a second.
So
that doesn't mean she wasn't trafficked. Just to be clear, that doesn't mean she wasn't trafficked, because the age for trafficking is consistent. It's 18.
Okay, so but this gets to my point about the fundamental incoherence.
What's
of the
incoherent
trafficking
about that?
concept.
That's very clear what I just said.
So you're saying you're willing to acknowledge effectively, right, that Annie Farmer, that's who you're referring to,
Yes, I am.
claims that she was flown to New Mexico, that she was not subjected to any
Illegal sexual
wrongdoing.
Not,
Yeah, which
I'm
is
not-
what
wait,
Judge Nathan ruled.
So hang on a second. Because under
That
the
was ruled
laws,
of two of them.
under the laws of New Mexico, the acts, the sexual acts themselves, were legal. The sexual acts, but that's not the nature of all that went on there. And of course, the trafficking statute is irrespective of state law. And so I'm just saying, as a matter of law, it's not the case.
No, it's not irrespective of state law, because
The enticing statute,
legality or lack
enticing
thereof of a certain sex act in New Mexico
For enticement.
is relevant to whether okay, sure, yeah, no, that's true, but just so you know, just for the record,
Yeah.
you're gonna have to discount one more of the four government witnesses in the Maxwell trial, because there were two that were found by Judge Allison Nathan, who was otherwise preposterously pro-prosecution. She was. She was nevertheless compelled to instruct the jury that fifth of the four government witnesses, so 50% of what we're told by Ro Khanna is 1,200 victims, although we know now that includes like uncles and second cousins.
Yeah, but we already. But can I ask why you repeat that? Because you and I we started this by saying that's a ridiculous number that's never been substantiated, and we find laughable on its face.
Because
why'd you repeat it?
Here's why I repeat it, because it's a worthwhile perspective to keep things in when we're talking about the Maxwell trial. If this universe of potential victims was so vast, right, then you would have thought, right, that the government would have no problem finding four or many more, really, witnesses or alleged victims to come and testify against Maxwell, given that we're told she was integral to the perpetration of the biggest child trafficking conspiracy in the history of the universe.
Yeah, but you're talking to me, Michael. You're talking to me.
Of that spectrum. No, I'm just saying as like a general
okay, fair enough.
Framing here. But of the 1,000 or 1,200 purported victims, the government finds four. They don't conspicuously call Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who you in a vacuum you would have thought would be a no-brainer to call, because she's the one who first introduced the idea that Ghislaine Maxwell had trafficked anybody to Jeffrey Epstein. She claimed she was trafficked first by Jeffrey Epstein.
That's assuming that Maureen Comey agrees with that maximalist vision, but you yourself say that she doesn't. So why would it make sense, actually, for Maureen Comey on that view to take in Virginia Roberts
Because
Giuffre?
if what Virginia Roberts Giuffre alleged were true or could be corroborated, then that would be slam dunk evidence against Maxwell, because Maxwell allegedly had trafficked Virginia to Jeffrey. Well, and that's where that whole notion was originated, that Ghislaine Maxwell trafficked anyone.
Well, let's be clear about that. That's not true.
But anyway, just to complete the previous point, it is true. It is true. But just to complete the previous point real quick, of the four witnesses, two, so 1,200 victims, four were located by the government to testify in 2021 against Maxwell. Of the four, two were dismissed by the Judge Nathan, otherwise preposterously pro-prosecution, as having been subjected to no, quote, illegal sexual activity.
That's not dismissal. Yet, I mean, that's pretending as though that the evidence that they offered is not relevant to the convictions, when of course they are. They are relevant to the conviction.
Judge Nathan said they were not to be regarded by the jurors as relevant insofar as they constituted illegal.
But that's a highly technical,
as a constituent element of one of the larger charges.
Sure, no. I grant that. That's why I think that there's some nuance here to talk about. But it's more than just one adjudicated victim.
And yet,
on your own view, three adjudicated victims.
Somebody who was subjected to no illegal sexual activity can still have been sex trafficked?
By definition.
The definition.
You might not agree with it, but
overhauled.
Okay, but Michael, whether you think the definition should be overhauled is a different question. Whether it is by definition possible.
I got you. So I'm just curious. So I'll ask you.
Yeah.
Leave aside the technicalities of the trafficking statute. Okay.
Yep.
Colloquially, politically, just in terms of popular parlance, do you think it makes sense for somebody who was found to have endured no illegal sexual activity in a formal criminal proceeding, in a very intense, detailed trial, to be trotted around, as Annie Farmer is, as a, quote, survivor Like, is she a survivor? Like, is that something we should?
I think she's a victim.
Accept
Yes,
the face value
I think she's a
of
victim.
what?
But of sexual trafficking, by definition.
Okay.
Well, you laugh,
Then,
but wait.
I don't know.
Well, am I supposed to be like, well, I shouldn't, when I'm considering whether they're a victim, what should I look to, Michael, other than application of the laws that would establish criminal liability and victimhood? What else do I look to? Do I feel bad for them?
Yeah, and the law didn't
I feel bad for them.
victimhood in terms of being a victim of any sexual misconduct.
Well, but that's not the only law that could be applied to that case. That's assuming that the only thing for which there could be criminal culpability with respect to one of these people is
I thought when
those
somebody
laws.
is declared to be a survivor or declares themselves a survivor, they're a survivor of some sort of sexual abuse.
Yeah, I'm not sure that is so limited in the way that you suggest. It could be a pattern of abuse that's different than just sexual abuse. I mean, I'm sure you know people in your life who've been emotionally abused, and a pattern of control in which they call themselves survivors of domestic situations doesn't necessarily imply any kind of like coercive sexual abuse act.
If someone in my life who I was honestly counseling, like privately, here's what I would honestly tell them. And this isn't even like a legal statement so much as almost a therapeutic one, or just a friendly, just personal guidance. If what you're saying is that you're a survivor of some kind of emotional manipulation, then I think I would advise not to interweave your whole identity as a person with your survivorship of emotional abuse.
Headphones unplugged. Just give me 1 second.
Everybody goes
so just pause real quick. But sorry, I didn't hear you. So you would advise, and I didn't hear the rest of it. Just go ahead.
Okay, I would advise that if somebody is saying that they were victimized by some sort of emotional abuse or something much more amorphous than like a direct sexual abuse, which I had thought would be customarily what survivorship was attached to, if somebody self-declares that or if that's ascribed to them. But if it's something just like emotional or something much more intangible, honestly, as a friend or as somebody who was like trying to give the best possible advice to someone, I would say, I think you would be much better off not interweaving your personal identity with your survivorship of some kind of emotional abuse. I think that would actually be counterproductive for you and might well prolong the emotional misfortune that you say that you're suffering from.
Can I respond? Let's just take a step back and let's get out of the legal technicalities for a second. Let's just talk about what was happening. I mean, like, what was happening? Epstein was clearly targeting these children, not because he wanted special massage therapies, not because he just really needed that many massages and he really wanted to support their scholarship endeavors, right? Come on, you don't believe that they were doing all this song and dance and picking out incredibly talented kids to do some kind of tag program? No, he was trying to use these girls, these under 18 girls, for their bodies and in the classical sense of grooming. That's what was going on. No one can really buy this whole like, well, Epstein just needed that many massages from these particular people. When he's having these encounters with their parents and trying to make sure that they think everything's okay or whatever. This was not an above board situation. This was a pattern of control and manipulation. You must grant that. I mean, how can you see these facts and see anything other than that?
Grooming is another concept that I'm willing to toss into the waste bin because, again, it's so ever expanding. It's so simply just susceptible to however anybody ever wants to define it, that I can't, it's never distilled to me into a coherent singular concept anymore. So if you go and look at like the clinical literature for when grooming was coined as like psychiatry journals and so forth, or like for forensic psychology for like the criminal wrongdoing, it was coined as something that it was defined as adults habituating children, like legitimate children who don't have the cognitive capacity to consent to any sexual act. Adults habituating them to become receptive to predatory adult sexual advances. So you do things that, quote, groom them, whereby they become receptive to those advances. Now we're told that grooming can occur to, I guess, anyone of any age.
Well, no, but like, put aside the 19-year-olds, put aside the 20-year-olds. Let's talk about the cases at here, the cases in Maxwell trial.
The 20-year-olds, but they've been at the forefront of the public impressions of a lot of what's been going on with the Epstein thing. That woman, Lisa Phillips.
But that's making your job too easy, Michael. That's making your job too easy. I mean, if what you're saying is that,
as an aside, I'm just curious for your thoughts, because this woman, Lisa Phillips, is the one who got in front of the TV cameras at the first Epstein survivors press conference in front of the Capitol in September and declared that she's going to compile her own list of sex trafficking perpetrators and then hand them over to Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene to read aloud on the floor of the House of Representatives under the protections of the speech and debate clause. And she never handed over the supposed list.
I'll respond to that.
She was assumed.
I'm happy to respond to your
have been
question.
a child trafficking victim, and yet he claims, and she actually reiterated to me when I spoke to her, that she claims that she's a victim of grooming starting at age 21 when she accepted an invitation by her other modeling friend to take a ferry from the British Virgin Islands to Jeffrey's estate in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Yeah, no, I think that definitionally
grooming applies to anyone.
I think definitionally
so that doesn't tell you anything about the elasticity of grooming as a concept.
But I have no problem saying that certain interpretations of concepts go too far, and I have no problem saying that on my view of what grooming is limited to underage relationships and sort of blossoming at a bare minimum.
That's a controversial statement in terms of survivor advocacy.
No, but hang on. But that is specific to the term grooming. I think there's other kinds of coercive conduct that I don't need to fully lay out here that could occur to overage people. That's why we have this whole like Me Too movement, this coercive shit. So I'm not willing to like say that there's no such a wrongful acts.
But as to grooming, or only children, right?
My view about what grooming is definitionally is with respect to underage people in anticipation of some kind of act when they're overage. That's my understanding of grooming. But just like the term, for example, like genocide, cultural genocide, there's concept creep that can occur. And you can call it out and you can be specific about who you're talking about. I'm being specific right now, right? The conduct of the people in the Maxwell case. On your view, surely that was grooming. Surely that was predatory. Surely that was fucked up.
I'll answer.
Yeah.
So in terms of the so we're out of the colloquial realm now and we're back to the realm of technical.
No. On your view. This was
okay. On my view as to the criminal.
No. Sorry, I'm not making myself clear. So I'm trying to get beyond the statutes.
I don't know what grooming is anymore, frankly. So I don't know how to.
You don't have a concept of grooming?
That, really. I wouldn't personally, I wouldn't on my own volition or from my own first person perspective, really describe anything as grooming at this point, other than a very straightforward case of an actual child, which I think for specificity, I would probably limit to like a prepubescent child. I could, yes, say like take like a genuinely pedophilic predator, okay, who is sexually attracted to a 7-year-old and habituates the 7-year-old into becoming receptive to a predatory sexual advance. I'd be fine calling that grooming because that seems like a plausible,
but like a 14-year-old
of the definition. But in terms of Annie Farmer,
no. But here's the difference, Michael. You have with the stuff
bias, influenced by her lunatic older sister Maria, and saying that because she was flown to New Mexico and she was sexually abused, she discovered, 20 years after the fact by, quote, an instance of hand-holding, which she wrote contemporaneously in her journal, which they only produced a small excerpt of at the trial, that she said it was no big deal, essentially. And yet she gets $1.5 million for it from the Epstein Victims Compensation Program drawn from the estate prior to the trial. Am I willing to just concede right off the bat that was quote unquote grooming? No, I'm really not. I think there's so many errors of cognition that have been.
We're talking about definitions here and your view. I mean, we're talking about your view on what these terms mean, right? And so you have some basis when you say, like, listen, the clinical definition of schmetophilia, right, is this, and this. Look at the DSM-5. This is what it says.
Oh, we get demonetized?
No, we don't.
That's
yeah, no worries. But where is your basis to say, or are you just using proprietary language to say grooming also is mapped onto prepubescent children? You just pulled that out of your ass, didn't you?
No. I was referring to what I had always understood to be the clinical or forensic psychology definition of grooming, which again would most quintessentially refer to prepubescent children being acclimated into receptivity to sexual advances by genuinely predatory adults. Now, I know we have had a lot of concept creep, and I know definitions are ever moldable and morphable to apply to whatever new conduct people would like to believe. I mean, I've been lectured by survivor advocacy people that I'm simply ignorant to what grooming is in 2025 or 2026. That's why I don't immediately accept that, a 21-year-old can be groomed. And so I think for the sake of
No, but a
clarity and
14-year-old,
specificity, if we're going to invoke that term, that may, yeah, I mean, that could be more of an edge case. Sure, I'm sure that's plausible. Annie Farmer wasn't 14; she was 16. We're told. I mean, the dates are always unclear in this stuff because you got to remember there was a general incentive to revise everybody's age downward as much as possible, and they'd often got tripped up because they would, like, they and their lawyers would try to assert something that would, like, illustrate that something happened at a particular age, and then they would, like, change up their story. So Nadia Bjorl and Jane, like, there was a claim that was introduced that she went and saw The Lion King on Broadway during one of the trips that she took to
Yeah.
New York, right? And then
And it came out in
the defense
97.
counsel, yeah, so they figured out that she had tried to revise her age downward to coincide with certain events.
Oh, but wait a second.
second.
Wait. Those are two interpretations. She either revised her age downward, which is unplausible because they have the record of her being in the camp at 14, of Epstein arriving at the camp at that very date, or she fucked up the date on Lion King. Which of those do you think is more plausible? It seems like you take every inference. Okay, I'm going to let you respond to that, but it seems like you take inferences in Epstein's favor at every moment, even to the, like, not willing to commit yourself to grooming, which almost seems like a colloquial definition, which at this point I think you think is too far gone to make use of it. Would you at least describe it as predatory, as power sort of manipulation, trying to get vulnerable people? You don't think
Not
so?
for Annie Farmer, absolutely not. I think Annie Farmer is a huckster. I'm sorry, I do. I think she connived with her older lunatic sister Maria, who, I mean, are you familiar with her backstory? Because
She had
she's the
some
one who
employment
basically,
relationship with Epstein before, right?
yeah, she was employed by Epstein at age 25 to basically be like the door woman at his New York townhouse. And then she was invited to go be an artist in residence at Leslie Wexner's compound in Ohio. At which time she says, in hindsight, like, she started saying 20 years after years after the fact, that she now understands herself to have been held in captivity or to have been kidnapped at age 26 at this compound in Ohio. And she is now, and so she did this like 3-hour hallucinatory interview or phone conversation with Whitney Webb, who is another piece of work, in 2020 that was posted. And she describes this like sex captivity that she claims that she was in. And she says that there came a time during her stay on this compound where she was invited to climb into bed with Jeffrey and Ghislaine, and one thing led to another, and all of a sudden she had like some divine revelation that they were files, even though she was 26 at the time. This is how she tells it as of 2020, right? When like everything is falling into place to prosecute Maxwell. And then she has this whole tale that she weaves about how she, I guess, had produced child pornography and confesses to it by having taken photographs of her younger sisters, Annie and then another sister, when they were under age 18. I'm not actually saying that she ought to have been prosecuted for that, obviously, but like, if we're going to be literalistic, which a lot of people seem to really want to be in terms of what would be a criminal violation, I don't understand how that wouldn't be. And I actually looked at the Ohio CSAM statute, and it would be applicable. As
Well,
of
I think,
1996.
can I just pause right there? That is one of the reasons that people have alleged, at least from within the department, in this Office of Professional Responsibility report, I believe, of why there was this clause supposedly to immunize, other co-conspirators, is there are cognizable cases of where, a purported victim could be, captured by some of the terms, within the statute. Yeah,
and they could be charged with trafficking.
Yeah.
Okay. Again,
and I think Virginia Roberts Gouffre.
I'm not saying they ought to. Yeah, including Jeffrey. Yeah, she too could have been charged with trafficking, and there was a open and shut case of perjury against her as well. That, of course, was never brought. Given
as with Maxwell as well. I mean, Maxwell is not.
No.
Those two
the
charges.
Charge against her was dismissed.
I know that. No. It was not finished. It was not completed. But you think that she didn't lie? You think she told the truth? You didn't think Maxwell knew what was going on? Maxwell knew what was going on, Michael. You don't think that she?
In terms of the excerpts of her deposition transcripts in Gouffre versus Maxwell, that they ended up citing as purported perjury on Maxwell's part. No, I don't think that's established as perjurious at all.
Well, it never went to trial. But do you really think that Maxwell is this like?
Okay, but how about Virginia Roberts Gouffre under oath and in sworn affidavits swearing to Alan Dershowitz, raping her effectively on 6 or 7 occasions that she goes on to describe in vivid graphic detail, and then recanting it a few years later. And then Sarah Ransom.
We've been through this. We've been through this. She didn't specifically recant it.
Her, Sarah Ransom also made up a fake claim of sexual abuse against Dershowitz. That was just not, I guess, officially recanted, because she just went like literally crazy, and she's insane even to this day, like sending these like all caps emails to like her former lawyers and claiming they had betrayed them. And like she wants Vladimir Putin to put her in charge of mediating a solution to the Ukraine war diplomatically. I mean, she's like an insane person. But that would be pretty ample grounds theoretically for a perjury charge against one or the other of them, right?
I don't know the statements I don't know the statements you're referring to with respect to.
I'll show you them.
With respect to Dershowitz, part of that settlement agreement didn't claim any wrongdoing. Now you might say, well, it's clear, the fact that she didn't claim any wrongdoing, didn't officially recant anything, acknowledges it may have been someone else. That is a recantation in and of itself. I don't think that she's. It's not a formal. If we're being super literal, as I think we are right now. And listen, if you show me statements and that some victims either lied maliciously, or purported victims, or have faulty memories. I mean, these events happened like 20 plus years ago, through the 90s and the early 2000s. And so, yeah, I mean, that wouldn't, I think, disprove what I'm trying to get you to sign on to, which is, this guy's a fucking creep.
Do you think it was an honest mistake that she described her sexual victimization by a particular?
Wait, who are you talking about now? Virginia Roberts Giuffre?
Virginia, you think
with her? I think she's much with her. I think she's much less credible. I think that she has her own issues, and guess what? That's part of like.
It wasn't just mixing up a date or something. She described in graphic
detail
each instance of sexual victimization.
I understand that, and part of the reason why, and I know you've been given this argument for, certain of these victims are targeted specifically because they come sometimes from homes where there is no father, sometimes where there is financial issues going on. And so I have I have no problem saying that someone alleged a false statement, it was a lie, or that Virginia Roberts on occasion has lied. What I'm trying to say is Epstein is going to be a predator.
Found in this memo that they suspiciously took down, because after Bradley Edwards fired
suspiciously
off his frantic plea.
In what sense?
Well, yeah, you don't think it's suspicious? I think it's take down any file. Do you?
I don't think they should take down files after they've been released, but I think it's also.
So I agree.
But some of these takedowns, some of these takedowns have been like explained by things that are more, that are I don't know. So I don't like all the explanations, but some of them have been mundane.
Let me know if you've seen a direct explanation for why this particular file was taken down, because it's an internal memo from December of 2019 that memorializes the SDNY prosecutor's interview of Virginia Roberts Giuffre in September of 2019, and goes through all her most sort of prominent claims that underpin the Epstein mythology, so to say. And you could almost tell, like, despite them trying to remain sort of stern in how they word it, that they're stunned at how fantastically uncorroborated any of it is.
I have no problem saying that.
This memo's been taken down.
Yeah.
This memo's been taken down. So why?
But the thing is, you can maintain both.
Why? Because Bradley Edwards is like saying that you're going to kill all these victims if you don't take down anything that contains a smidgen of allegedly victim identifying information. So for a deceased victim.
So first of all, he could be right when it comes to what the law demands. Do you grant that? He could be right about what the law demands?
No, not at all. I know what the law demands. Have you read the statute?
Of course I have. We had a whole stream analyzing it.
The law doesn't demand that at all.
Wait. So let's read the law then. Hang on.
The law. First of all, it doesn't require the redaction of anything to do with the victim identifying information.
When you say require, what do you mean?
It doesn't say. Doesn't say shall.
It says. But it gives.
No, seriously. That's the operative language.
No, I understand. Hang on.
It authorizes Bondi to discretionarily redact victim identifying information.
Got it. No, but that could be regardless of whether or not it's required under the statute, under the terms of the statute, it is a valid basis to request a withholding or redaction, correct?
I argued to Judge Berman in a very lengthy legal letter that he actually acknowledged reading and receiving from me in early December, and I requested that he put it on the docket, and he said that he would confer with his staff, and I guess they never put it on the docket. But anyway, he did read the letter. What I argued is that this maximally expansive redaction criteria flies in the face of, let's say, the spirit of the law. I mean, it's called the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Came about as a result of a widespread clamor for maximum disclosure of all pertinent Epstein quote files. And so, given the very foreseeably large spectrum of files that would have something or other to do with information that could be said to be connected to the identifying information of any victim. Because remember, it's like several steps of potentially relevant material that could conceivably be covered. Because like they say, like anything that could have the most peripheral possible connection to any victim, if that people could just
this
like
is the permitted withholding.
Dots.
And I think you have to agree.
Yeah, this is the criteria the plaintiff's lawyers for the victims have demanded. So I argue that it's violative of the spirit of the law, even if you can obviously
it can't be. No, it can't be violative of the spirit of the law, because the law was passed with that provision included in it. And it's the policy of this government to redact all personally identifiable information of victims or victims' personal medical files and similar files of disclosure, which would constitute a clearly an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. So isn't it a bit much to accept that part of the spirit of the law would disallow or look disfavorably upon that kind of policy?
But you know, you're a lawyer, right? You know that like every subsequent word in that sentence you just read out could be litigated to death in terms of what it's supposed to require.
That's part of the reason why I think it's devious. I think it's devious. I almost think it's intentional for some actors to keep this in the news.
It infringes on a dead person's privacy to keep publicly available a memo that describes the
that's just for the last category. I read three categories: contain personally identifiable information of victims, 1, or victims' personal medical files, 2, and similar files, 3, the disclosure of which would constitute clearly an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. I would only apply that unwarranted invasion of personal privacy to the similar files thing. Which how
about for living people?
No, I don't think living people have. Some state decisions are different because there's FOIA statutes that are, state analogs, but in general, I don't think that there ought to be privacy interests for dead people. That's my view. I don't think that it should be the case.
Right. Well, apparently privacy interests for dead people are being enforced in this redaction process.
The statute provides
her name. She just had a internationally best-selling memoir published in October, and yet, even so, her name is still redacted anywhere that it's found in these files. Explain that to me.
Yeah. So, wait, her name is redacted because her name is, quote, personally identifiable information.
Roberts or Virginia Roberts or any variation of her name.
That's what the law provides for. You're saying it's ridiculous. I agree that it's ridiculous in her case, but
I think it's a specious application of the law. Then
no, because you don't want any of this shit redacted. You don't even want to use exactly. So of course you would have an issue with it.
I want maximum disclosure and transparency.
I'm just saying
that's what everybody wanted. Apparently not.
Listen, I'm fine with it. I want maximal. We're agreement on that. I mean, we're agreement with that. But the just question is, it's not in violation of the spirit of the law if the law contains that permitted withholding.
So we get maximum disclosure such that Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie can defame a bunch of random guys like an auto mechanic and an IT worker in New York City as having been sex criminals by reading out their names on the floor of the house as Ro Khanna did, or Thomas Massie saunters out of the DOJ on Monday and says they're, quote, likely incriminated in pedophilic sex crimes. So we're okay with transparency for those guys where they end up getting defamed in the most heinous possible criminal acts that anybody can be accused of doing. But everybody has to just forevermore walk on the most absurd eggshells such that nothing that could ever be connected to any alleged victim, not an adjudicated victim, not even somebody who has ever had to even really make a claim of victimization, everything is redacted on their behalf. That seems like an imbalance.
I disagree massively with Roe and Massey's decision to do that there. I think that part of the reason why the department probably didn't want to do this is it's a huge task of labor to have like 500 plus DOJ attorneys be going through all these redactions and wasting their time when
shouldn't there be some kind of repercussion for that? I mean, that's one of the worst things I've ever seen a member of Congress do.
Don't get wild with it. One of the worst things you've ever seen a member of Congress do.
Talk
about supporting the insurrection against our country. Talking about supporting this criminal president.
Okay, it's up there. So accusing totally innocent men of having been guilty of like sex crimes, like you think it's no big deal? It's just
that's every day in the U.S. Congress, Michael Tracey. Every time they come on when they're parading all these wild claims about Democrats. I think that there should be political. Listen, I think there should be. I think that they should apologize. I think that was an epic fail. I think that was wrong to do. But for you to act here sanctimonious, like it's the worst thing that's ever happened. No, this is every day in the Congress. It's absurd shit. Whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene or
give me another example of some random citizen. I'm not saying a rival politician or somebody in the public eye. I'm saying random citizens who had no notoriety whatsoever. I mean,
how about like random cops who are being accused of being? How about random cops accused of being bombers? The bombing on the January 6th day, or accusing them of being an inside job. I mean, give me some time to find. Yeah, and it's bad. That's bad. What do you want me to say? It's fucking horrible. But I'm just trying to say that's a different claim. That's a different claim.
Rank it like however you would rank it on the scale of things that are bad that members of Congress have done. Unto itself, it was quite bad, right?
It was quite bad. It was really bad. Yeah, you shouldn't have done that, and that's
so
part
of.
There
should be no like amends made for that, or no.
What do you want to happen? I mean, what do you mean amends made? A lot of bad shit.
I think anybody who's just sane would have by now apologized for the men or issued.
Wait, you and I agree with that. We just agreed with that,
and they haven't done it.
Yeah, they should.
They're blaming the DOJ.
Well, the DOJ. I think the DOJ has some culpability as well, to the extent that they're not being consistent. They're not being consistent in terms of redactions, because you agree, and you've been one of the first to notice, is they'll just like put a black, block out over any woman or anyone who claims it, and so the very inconsistency of redactions.
I'm not defending the consistency of the redactions at all. I mean, during the first round of release on December 19th, like I just happened, like of course I spent all night going through them, and I just happened to find like a rant. So I found a copy of a press release that was put out when Epstein was arrested in July 2019, right? And they by the SDNY by Jeffrey Berman, the U.S. attorney, and they redact like the name, like so he's thanking like everybody who helped bring the prosecution about. And they redact the name of like the then chief of police of the NYPD.
Well, that's one of the things that I think Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna are doing. Wait, hang on a second. But that's one thing that Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna are doing that are good. Wait, so I
bears responsibility.
Yes, they do.
Flaws in this record production, but Ro Khanna bears responsibility for not doing 2 seconds of due diligence.
Absolutely, absolutely. But they also did something good recently, which was they showed that the DOJ is in fact doing these withholdings of. Was it Lex Wexner for that one, I don't know, alleged, or was it someone else for one of the alleged co-conspirators that never panned out, whatever the claim was about that one image that the DOJ then unredacted after being shown it by Thomas Massie.
Was it a list of names?
It was a list of names and images alongside them, I believe. But those were some, and they uncovered.
I just know the list of names.
Yeah, Thomas Massie uncovered and Ro Khanna uncovered after looking at the files behind closed doors that the DOJ is doing improper, disclosure. So yeah, I can blame them for not doing their due diligence on that. No doubt about that. I get it.
I'm sure there are to be superfluous and arbitrary redactions for. That relate to non-victim identifying information, meaning there's going to be other categories probably of unwarranted redactions. That's perfectly plausible to me. So if they discover an instance of that, okay. But
I want you more mad about Jeffrey Epstein, though. I mean, look at your passion right now about Ro Khanna and defaming these people, and you think that that's worse than what Epstein did to these girls, right?
I mean, come on. Why are we? It's apples and oranges.
But. Can you compare the heat you have for the defamation actions horrible by Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie? And
I don't know. You know what? I've read too much of the primary source documentation to flatly declare much of anything in like a morally absolute way about this. I'm sorry. Like, how is it? I tweeted this earlier today, but I still find it to be utterly astounding. For all the journalistic resources, media resources, legal resources that have been poured into this, so 1 million podcasts, Netflix specials, Hulu, BBC, you name it, New York Times, everything that have been poured into this Jeffrey Epstein story for the past however many years, especially in the past like year or 6 months, but like going back even much further than that. How is it that I guess I'm the only buddy with any media adjacency who thought to go to the Florida court docket and pull up the transcript of the plea hearing where Epstein entered his guilty plea in June of 2008, so we could see like what precisely he pleaded guilty to?
Bit of a dodge, Mike. It's a bit of a dodge. The Ashley woman.
It was by way of that, that I figured out that Ashley Davis, who again, I find to be perfectly credible was the one person to whom he pleaded guilty to procuring as a minor for prostitution. And she very much evinced being much more troubled, and you might even say harmed, by her unwanted embroilment in the in the prosecution of Epstein than she ever had been by her interactions with Epstein. In fact, she said, and this is almost a direct quote, this is before the grand jury. She's like, I was doing just perfectly fine. Like she was getting, she was, in college or something. I was doing perfectly fine in my life until you guys summoned me to testify before the grand jury. So I don't know. There's just not like she had no interest in participating in the prosecution of Epstein. Like she didn't conceive herself as having been victimized.
It reminds me of the argument that Trump made.
Am I supposed to just declare that like it was such heinous victimization that it's just like the worst thing in the world, and also like the UK government should collapse over it, and like random ministers in Europe should be fired over it, and like anybody who emailed something jocular to Epstein 15 years ago ought to be censured for it? No, I'm not willing to declare that. Sorry.
I'm not making it on those terms. I'm just saying, as between that and the defamatory actions, I mean, you're talking about, I don't think that you grant that any of the victims in the Maxwell matter, despite the fact that I think the evidence is quite strong. I mean, there was a connection there. I mean, you grant that they were, these women or these girls, young girls, at least Jane, who, and I think it's Kate.
Yeah, Kate is Anushka Degorgiou, who was also found to have endured no illegal sexual activity.
I'm talking about, and Carolyn, Jane and Carolyn, that they weren't doing this for supreme
Carolyn
massage work.
Claimed that if she was trafficked by anyone, it was by Virginia Roberts Giuffre, not Ghislaine.
Okay,
at least in terms of what she unambiguously asserted. Of course, they tried to.
Let me get it out. Jeffrey Epstein was using these minors for his own kicks because he wanted sexual gratification. Do you deny that? And isn't that worse than defamation?
In the Florida case, sure.
No, not in the Florida case. Not in the Florida case.
I think beyond the Florida, I think a lot of stuff got after the fact kind of grafted onto the facts and circumstances of the Florida case, because otherwise there wasn't a lot of grounds to tie in other activity. And
I mean, Maxwell's own lawyers granted by
the hallucinatory tales of Maria Farmer, who claims like she got somehow like Bill Clinton and Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, she says, gave her 2 cancers. Somehow she claims that like every Jewish person she ever met is both a pedophile and running the world financial system. And this is somebody who then enlisted the Annie to comport her own tale with Maria's tale. And oh, by the way, as of May of 2025, Maria Farmer and another nutcase who claims that she was abducted by aliens on Jeffrey Epstein's New Mexico ranch and had her eggs removed, and then witnessed Jeffrey transform into a reptilian humanoid. They're suing the federal government and demanding $600 million more dollars because they haven't got enough from all these compensation programs. They're suing the federal government for $600 million, and that case is ongoing.
I want to try to stay focused on one.
The allegation of grooming that flows from that is presumptively.
Let's stay focused on one case, and it'll be last time. I do want to talk about one other thing before we call it, but I do appreciate your time. I want to stay focused purely on. As you can tell, I could go on. I know. I'm happy to. No, I do as well.
Well informed.
I appreciate that.
Most of these 10 million podcasts I've been doing, and I should probably moderate how many I do. But like a lot of times, it's me just having to do like a primer.
Yeah,
on
just like the base
Epstein
facts.
Story. So it's good. It's refreshing to be able to go into the granular details.
I appreciate that, Mike. I want to just focus on Jane for a second. Do you doubt that Epstein met Jane when she was 14?
I think it's plausible that they might have encountered one another in some fashion when they were 14. Now that's different from any sexual abuse beginning at 14.
Sure, but like, in terms of what is he doing inviting her in Palm Beach? What is he doing with this 14-year-old? Why is he bringing her to these places?
I don't know. Her mother brought her to the house. Her mother accepted benefaction from Epstein because Epstein, I guess, was intrigued that her father was a accomplished violinist and had died recently. And look, I don't know. I mean,
what do you think is most likely? Why is this 40-year-old and 30 taking this interest in this 14-year-old, bringing her across the country.
You want me to give you my theory as to what probably
yes,
happened?
Yes.
I think, sure, they might have met when she could have been 14, and then that could be after the fact called grooming, even if the sexual contact, such as it existed, did not occur at that phase. But then later on, once she becomes, I don't know, 16, 17, 18, 19, because we know that she sent him a sexy headshot at 19 after he was basically subsidizing her to live in Los Angeles and become an actor on.
She testifies on her mother's request. She testifies
and dance in Ricky Martin music videos for "Livin' La Vida Loca."
That's not inconsistent at all. Why does that make the tendency of what I just said less or more?
Because if she emerged from sex trafficking captivity and she's dancing "Livin' La Vida Loca" in a music video like shortly thereafter, I don't know.
What is it? I just want to know, how does that affect your priors on before? How does it have any tendency to make it more or less likely bad conduct before? The fact that she sent the headshot and the fact that she was dancing.
Because it suggests how things can be reframed after the fact, after Epstein is decided to have been the most notorious pedophile in American history, and then he dies and the settlement floodgates open, and Nadia Bjorlin, aka Jane, starts conferring with a personal injury attorney in Los Angeles who advises her. I don't know if you came across this aspect of the Maxwell trial. The personal injury attorney, yes, advises her to proactively cooperate with the feds to prosecute Maxwell in lieu of Epstein, because that's who now they're hell-bent on prosecuting after he dies, and they're humiliated that Epstein had died in government custody, and there's this popular groundswell for somebody to be, quote, held accountable, and they zero in on Maxwell, and Nadia is told you can maximize your settlement payout by proactively cooperating with the feds.
He said it would help the case. The stipulation is they would help the case. But just putting that aside.
And Glassman puts in the letter that they submit to the Victims Compensation Program that he says, oh, by the way, Epstein Victims Compensation Program, my client is deserving of the highest possible settlement payout because she is currently comporting her story to best enable the SDNY to prosecute Maxwell. And she already sued. She already sued individually, and she also sued individually. Did you know this? Maxwell for $20 million. And then that basically got.
So this is a clear double standard, Michael. So the self-serving.
Double standard?
No, I will tell you. I will tell you. Let me explain it. Let me explain why it's a double standard. So first of all, I do accept that that's a basis for bias. You can impeach them on bias. All right, absolutely, you can impeach them for bias. But when it comes to the self-serving conduct of civil litigants who are trying to get what's best for their client, you take that as a point against. You take that as a point against Shane. When it comes to Epstein and his attorneys, Epstein was beguiled by his own lawyers, and his lawyers told him. And so, how can we ascribe to Epstein any malconduct?
He was beguiled by his lawyers.
It's definitely the impression you give is that he had to accept this deal because his lawyers were just kind of. He was upset about the deal.
Did I say anything like what you would characterize as Epstein having been beguiled?
Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. Do you take the fact that his lawyers are advising him to take the deal?
I don't even know what you're referring to.
So when I hear you talk about the advice that Epstein is getting from his lawyers, and the fact they took the plea deal, I don't think are willing to read in too much to the plea deal because of the fact that he is represented by these people and he's just listening and following his attorney's advice. And
I don't know that I've really said anything like that.
That's what I hear. But you can.
But no, I of course Epstein wasn't beguiled by them. In fact, he was angry at them. Like he had a whole falling out with Dershowitz because he thought he got a horrible deal.
And do you agree with that?
I think that the deal was, in fact, quite onerous. It certainly wasn't a, quote, sweetheart deal, which is how Julie K. Brown in the Miami Herald ended up characterizing it many years after the fact. And as far as what I've been able to research, the term sweetheart deal didn't even originate with Julie K. Brown. It originated with a different victim lawyer. I think it was Spencer Kerwin. Don't hold me to that 100%, but I think there was another victim's lawyer who in like 08, 09 said something to the effect that this was a sweetheart deal. And that just entered the folklore. And then it was re-enlivened by Julie K. Brown in 2018. And now everybody just like believes as on gospel that it must have been a sweetheart deal. Because of course they've never really looked into the terms of it, the facts and circumstances that gave rise to it, the legal and evidential problems that caused the Southern District of Florida under Acosta to determine that the optimal solution from their perspective was to compel Epstein to accept a non-prosecution agreement where he would get some measure of punishment, such as a term of incarceration, lifetime registration as a sex offender, civil restitution, which is like a very novel thing that they manufactured. I think one of a kind in criminal law, where like it delves into the civil remuneration, rather than risk potentially going to trial, which, yeah, Epstein did have very well-resourced defense counsel, because they thought that they ran the risk of Epstein actually being acquitted or there being a mistrial.
So do you agree with the OPR when it concludes? Do you disagree with the OPR when it concludes, quote, that Acosta's decision to resolve the federal investigation through the NPA constitutes poor judgment? Although the decision was within the scope of his broad discretion, and OPR does not find that it resulted from improper factors, the NPA was a flawed mechanism for satisfying the federal interest that caused the government to open its investigation of Epstein. Do you have any reason to doubt that?
And even Acosta basically conceded that there were certain flaws into how that ended up being resolved, because for one thing, contemporaneously, Acosta's office was annoyed, especially this Villafana prosecutor, who was the most hard charging in wanting to prosecute Epstein to the maximum extent, because, like, Acosta acknowledges this, they sort of overlooked what they might have otherwise inserted into the NPA as to the terms of Epstein's incarceration, because once they found out that he was granted work release after several months. And actually, he told Steve Bannon in like the 2-hour excerpt of the 14+ hour video that finally came out. I don't know where the other 12 hours are, but like of the 2 hours that came out, Epstein said, and I hadn't been fully aware of this, but before he was granted work release in October of 2009, October 2008, in the preceding several months, he had been in solitary confinement. Now, solitary confinement and sweetheart deal don't really go together to me, and. So,
but do we know that's because of his protection or because of punishment?
Acosta said they hadn't fully realized the degree.
I'm asking your view, though. I'm asking your view. No, and the OPR here is like questioning this notion that the federal investigation, that the responsibility was should be limited to the states. I mean, that seems to be the very thing that you claim was the basis for him to receive this kind of treatment, which you feel was harsh. The OPR, which you cite all the time, is calling into question whether that was a good use of judgment. That, in other words, assuming that there's no federal interest here, was a poor exercise of judgment, and that's what the NPA was ultimately premised on.
There was an assumption of no federal interest. There was a confirmation from their perspective that there was a federal interest. They just thought that the federal interests were satisfied by the non-prosecution agreement.
Right, and the OPR disagrees, and I'm asking your view. Do you agree with the OPR in that respect?
I don't think the OPR disagrees with that. I think that OPR points to retrospectively certain flaws that really revolve mostly around this victim notification concept having to do with the Crime Victims' Rights Act. Like, that was what Edwards was litigating. And
well, no, we can get this right.
Trying to get the NPA invalidated or nullified.
This is on page 10 of the executive summary. And I'm going to quote the entire paragraph. Nevertheless, OPR concludes that Acosta's decision to resolve the federal investigation through the NPA constitutes poor judgment. Although this decision was within the scope of Acosta's broad discretion, and OPR does not find that it resulted from improper factors, the NPA was a flawed mechanism for satisfying the federal interest that caused the government to open its investigation of Epstein. In Acosta's view, the federal government's role in prosecuting Epstein was limited by principles of federalism, under which the independent authority of the state should be recognized, and the federal responsibility in this situation was to serve as a backstop to state authorities by encouraging them to do more. However, Acosta failed to consider the difficulties inherent in a resolution that relied heavily on action by numerous state officials over whom he had no authority.
Right.
He resolved the federal
incarceration.
Sure, but there's more than that. He resolved the federal investigation before significant investigative steps were completed. And he agreed to severe, unusual, and problematic terms in the NPA without the consideration required under the circumstances. In sum, Acosta's application of federalism principles was too expansive. His view of the federal interest in prosecuting Epstein was too narrow, and his understanding of the state system was too imperfect to justify the decision to use the NPA. And I'm finishing now. Furthermore, because Acosta assumed a significant role in reviewing and drafting the NPA, and the other three subjects who were supervisors left the U.S. Attorney's Office, were transitioning to other jobs, or were absent at critical junctures, Acosta should have ensured more effective coordination and communication during negotiation before approving the final NPA. The NPA was a unique resolution, and one that required greater oversight and supervision than Acosta provided. Seems like there were unusual provisions, unusually bad in the view of the OPR.
I agree that it was certainly an unusual mechanism, or even a flawed mechanism, because if you read the full report, I don't know if you've read all 320 pages, but they spend a lot of time describing what they say are the flaws that were attend, that sort of uh, they describe, they spend a lot of time describing the flaws of the NPA, and the flaw that they spend, I think, probably the most time describing and underscoring has to do with this victim notification concept, where in advance of a potential plea, the government is obliged, or it wasn't clear like to what degree the government was obliged, the federal government is to identify victims it has designated as victims that a plea is forthcoming. Um, and then that became the basis for this CVRA lawsuit that Gouffre attempted to join in 2014. And I think it's a kind of an arcane
Yeah, but
thing.
you question the propriety of that, Michael. But isn't your theory of harm somewhat premised on, well, does the victim say that it was bad? I mean, you say that you think these laws are archaic and you shouldn't like consult the victim or whatever. But when I was asking you about whether or not what Epstein did was bad, one of the things you pointed to saying maybe not that big of a deal was how it was described by the victim. And so I'm at a loss. Surely, well, in your view, you should.
But there were purported victims who received victim notification letters from the FBI in advance of the plea in June of 2008, who themselves denied that they were victims and refused to cooperate with prosecutors because they wanted to exonerate Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, wait.
We have more information on that that's come out.
I'm addressing your
files.
support or lack of support
some of them who received these victim notification notices would then go on to deny that they ever even provided a massage to Epstein, or if they did, it was actually just a massage and it wasn't even sexualized. So yeah, I do think that whole notion that the government somehow has an obligation, which wasn't clear at the time, like Acosta will cite a DOJ OLC directive from during the time of like the Bush administration, where they said that pre-conviction, the government did not have an active notification to necessarily notify every potential victim, right? But then it got broadened later, and now I guess the government is required to do that. But at the time, it wasn't at all clear, and an argument could be made that the government was not proactively obliged to do these.
I'm trying to get your view, Michael. And Richard told me about this. He said you hate to give your view sometimes, and I really
my view is that the Crime Victims' Rights Act is like a shambolic law, and it was one of these like it was drafted and introduced by John Kyle, who's like a hardcore tough on crime Republican, and it's under the auspices of quote unquote victims' rights, which has always been used as a cover to pass the most punitive possible legislation, because who wants to not help victims, right? And so yeah, I mean, I disagree just with the theory of the Crime Victims' Rights Act, in that how is it proper for the government to treat a alleged victim as a bona fide victim and provide them certain forms of relief and advance notice of things before it's even been established that they've been victimized by virtue of a conviction?
Presumably, if they think as you do, that one of the main things that we look to when deciding whether to exercise a prosecutorial discretion is the harm of purported victims, which is what your response was with respect to this woman. Now I'm forgetting her name, the 17-year-old for whom he was actually convicted in Palm Beach. You said, well, she didn't really think it was that big of a, Ashley Davis. She didn't think it was that big of a deal. And so presumably, if they think as you do, that communication and understanding, the victim's theory of harm is important to whether or not you feel it's a big deal, you would want them to advise. That's what the potential. I'm not saying it's a contradiction as such. I'm saying it seems counterintuitive.
Why would I want them to pre-notify a potential victim of their victimhood before it's even been established through either a conviction or a guilty plea that they were in fact victimized?
Did you hear me? On your view, you said right, like, oh, I don't even know if this. I'm not willing to say this is that bad
about the harm.
Yes,
okay,
yes.
So I mean, sure. So I've been asked, who would I concede was harmed by Epstein? So this sort of gets to the questions that you've been asking me. Here's the category of victim, because there are multiple subcategories, like the 21-year-old models who would now say that they were trafficked 15 or 20 years after the fact. I mean, give me a break. Once the JP Morgan settlement floodgates open, I mean, the credulity with which those people are treated is just unbelievable. But so in the Palm Beach phase, right, which has always been the element of this that I've conceded, like you could definitely say Epstein did something I would call either reckless or impulsive or bad on some level. Um, is so the girls recruited amongst themselves. I mean, people don't like to hear that. People, I guess,
No. That was what was said by the prosecutor in the Maxwell case, that they recruited women as part of their pyramid scheme of further and trafficking. So don't act as though that's not an acknowledged part, at least from the perspective of Maureen Comey.
I found that people get
ignorant people. Yes.
I'm talking about 07, 08. Okay. So this is pre-Maureen Comey.
Got it.
I just found that people get offended when you simply note that the girls recruited amongst themselves. Like Carey, the detective, was
they did.
Asked. Yeah. So it was never the case that like Jeffrey Epstein called up some girl for the first time and said, "Hey, do you want me to traffic you to my house?" or something like that.
Yeah, he used people like Maxwell. He used other intermediaries.
Not in 07, 08.
I'm not saying in 07. I'm not saying in 07, 08.
I'm saying about 07, 08 right now.
All right.
I'm telling you what subcategory of victim I would deem to have the most legitimate claim to victimhood. So when the girls were recruiting amongst themselves, right, they were in the same age range, but some were a bit older, some were a bit younger. Legal age of consent is 18 in Florida. So you would expect like cliques of girls or girls who are friends with one another, like some being younger and some being older, or like in social encounters, like an older girl would encounter a younger girl, right? Whatever. So there are some girls who it seems were asked by a friend or an acquaintance if they wanted to come to this rich guy's house and do some kind of massage. And maybe for some of them, it seems like it probably wasn't fully explained to them what they could expect. Now, on the first visit, Epstein frequently would not attempt to initiate overt sexual contact with a new girl, right? That would more often happen later as they came back for subsequent visits on their own volition, but came back. But there were some cases where a girl will go one time, never go again because she was creeped out, even if there was no overt sexual contact. If you have like a guy in his 50s asking, "Hey, would you mind stripping to your bra?"
Yeah.
She's like, "Wait a second,
well, Michael, that's the whole point. Wait, that's the whole point.
So even if they weren't sexually abused overtly, clearly that's still something like you could imagine a 16 or 17-year-old finding disturbing, even if maybe they lied about their age, or even if they didn't. It doesn't even particularly matter. So many of them did lie about their age. They were told to by the other girls. But leaving that aside, I think it could be said to be a legitimate claim to victimhood if somebody was like naive, didn't really know what they were getting into, maybe wanted to go to support a friend or something like that, kind of got dragged along, and they end up in a massage room with this creepy old guy. Okay. Now, do I think that's grounds to declare like 18 years later that we're in the midst of the biggest pedophilia crisis ever to
talk to me though? Talk to me though.
Humanity?
No. I'm not saying that this is strictly speaking a pedophilia crisis. I talk to me, and what I'm saying is this fact: the fact that
you might have to resign from your Twitch stream.
No,
based on the way things are going.
Listen, we're using the technical definition here, and I'm not claiming that the maximalist interpretation of the Epstein files is true. I have said to my stream, multiple times that there is no smoking gun proof for these maximalist claims, and I understand. Yeah, the age range of these girls is 14 evidence for the existence of the maximalist vision. I agree with that. But the thing is, you keep repeating it when we're past that, right? We're past that, fine. And you and I agree on that. But the question is, what you just granted, that fact pattern that you granted, is so similar to the fact pattern as alleged in the Maxwell case. And you have to sit there and think, like, what? In what sense is it not? This
in no sense is the fact, because the fact pattern for the Palm Beach girls was like recurring. It was almost an identical fact pattern for virtually all of them, with like maybe some minor differences here and there. But ultimately, the fact pattern was girls recruiting amongst themselves and going to the house and being asked to strip down for massage. They were often told, and Epstein would tell them, "Look, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do, etc." And he would accept if like they didn't want to do X, Y, or Z. But that, like, the fact pattern was basically the same for all of them in that phase. The fact pattern that was alleged for Annie Farmer is like sui generis. The fact pattern
not James. Wait, James is not sui generis. James is not sui generis.
Yes, it is.
How? In what respect? She was in Palm Beach. She was in Florida as well.
Right, but she wasn't one of the quote Palm Beach girls. I mean, the people who would have been involved in this 2007, 2005 to 2008 investigative
She was like in the
phase. She wasn't
90s.
interviewed then.
Yeah. She was like in the 90s, but the
Exactly.
fact
So
pattern.
it's just like a different scenario.
No, but this is because the time is
I mean,
different. Doesn't mean the methods are.
Tried to graft it onto the Palm Beach phase with Epstein because that was what was established by his guilty plea. But no, I don't agree. I mean, they were not comparable phases.
We'll take the following, right? The fact that he's reaching out to her at all, right? Okay. Why is this kind of guy reaching out to a 14-year-old? You know, there's not like a scholarship committee that's considered. No, just use your common sense, your day to day. He's not reaching her out for a scholarship. All right. When is there any review process for a scholarship? He's not reaching out to her because she's Noam Chomsky.
Why not? Did she get a scholarship?
Wait. So, with respect to, I don't know if she got a scholarship. There's a big back and forth about
he paid for her stuff.
No, 100%. But why is he doing this? That's the question. It's not because he's opened a foundation and he's accepting
want a black and white answer that like totally morally condemns Epstein. I do think it was complicated. Obviously, there probably was some sexual component to much of what he did. I'm not denying that, of course. The guy was like pathologically obsessed with getting massages several times a day at one point because Maxwell says he was ingesting disturbingly high doses of testosterone beginning around the early 2000s.
I forgot about the testosterone defense. Well, what does that matter? Okay, he's consuming testosterone.
It's not a defense. No, I'm conceding that he was clearly motivated by sexual gratification.
No, but what other thing explains it? He's such a charitable person. He wants to help this person who's down on their luck.
I think he could do quite a bit of that. Why did he help Chomsky?
I distinguish someone like Chomsky, someone like Dershowitz, someone like Bill Clinton from the 14-year-olds because there's a reason why you would talk to Chomsky. There's a reason. No, but that's what I mean. What's the reason other than massages and having in your black book, Ghislaine Maxwell, a list of like underage girls for massages? If you need that many massages, there are legitimate organizations that you can get that from.
Nadia was alleged to have given him maybe I'm misremembering, and I have to go back.
Yes, she was.
Was it alleged that it was like a full
a massage and also touching penis, having vibrators used on her.
I know she alleged that in order to establish one of the overt acts for the whereas so she was one of the two where the judge did not rule that she had endured no illegal sexual activity. She was ruled to have endured illegal sexual activity per the terms of the statute, right? And one of those overt acts was she claimed that she was in an orgy at one point that involved Ghislaine Maxwell. And strangely, the government never was able to identify the other participants in that alleged orgy, but the defense
maybe because she couldn't. Oh, no, there's the whole name thing. There's the name thing, right?
I don't. The name thing the name thing is.
But these are all. Hang on. The thing is, you can
anyway,
you can poke and prod at.
Plausibly, the defense identified the part who would have to have been the participants, and they came and testified and denied that any such thing ever took place. To me, that was pretty persuasive, and actually. The contestation by Maureen Comey et al. Of the names didn't hold up because there was nobody else in the orbit at the time with the same name.
So what is she identified? So what is she doing having this long contact with Epstein? She's not Chomsky. He's just interested in a precocious 14. Yeah. Sorry.
Look, I mean, could I imagine that? Look, she was maybe an attractive young. However old she was, 14, 15 at the time, Epstein might have wanted to help sort of cultivate her musical or artistic pursuits on some level. But then in addition to that, there might have been a notion that later when she's like a bit older, that perhaps she could be one of the semi-girlfriends that he has around. And then that comes to pass when she's older. Like I mean, I think that's pretty plausible.
I think it's kind of fucked up though, and I think it's worse. I'm just saying, I think it's fucked up, and it's worse than defamation. I think it happened. If you can pick apart and say, okay, Maxwell wasn't there for this, or okay, she misremembered who was there at the orgy, but
there's such high. I just think it's really worthwhile to be cognizant of hindsight bias and how people can reframe their memories once they're told that the person with whom they had an interaction or this series of interactions with 15 or 20 years ago and never took any action about it, maybe it was a good memory or a bad memory or some combination, maybe it was ambiguous to them. But then once they're told that, oh, lo and behold, this guy was the most notorious pedophile in world history, do you really find it that implausible to see how maybe stuff can get reframed with that hindsight, especially with the gigantic financial incentive?
I don't find it implausible that people can reframe memories they had in the past to be distortions. What I find implausible is that there's an innocent explanation for those contacts. I can't think of one that is plausible to me in the moment. And given all the other, like we know that this girl was reached out to when she was 14. We know that, or at least I think that's what the evidence suggests that she was. And why? Why? It's not like she's going through some process.
It's been a while since I've read the full transcript. So like at what age do they allege
14
sexual contact?
14. It's 14.
So, so immediately after the interlochen?
No. There's some months between when the camp ends, sometime in August,
and the timelines were always fuzzy.
But the contact initiates when she's 14. After she goes to camp, she goes back to Florida. And that's where she alleges that either Maxwell or Epstein reached out to her parents, or her mom. I think her dad at this point is dead. And to me, all of this rings true of what we know about Epstein, that he pleaded guilty. He loves his massages. He's and it strikes me like, oh no, for these girls, the 17-year-old, and with one day short of her 18th birthday, that's where it's all sexual, all massage. But this is a precocious child.
What's your theory of why, if she contemporaneously was so brutally victimized in the most heinous sex trafficking?
Oh, you know the answer. You know the answer. This pattern of abuse. I mean, so you know that not everyone always.
So she decided to send a sexy headshot of herself with the caption, "Dear Jeffrey, you rock my world." Like, thanks
her
for
mom.
That you've done.
Because
of a pattern of abuse. She blamed on her mom. I don't necessarily know we don't know for sure that was because of her mom.
She told, not contemporaneously, but some years and before. A lot of certainly the Miami Herald series came out, that she talked to a boyfriend. The boyfriend came and testified. I think his name was Mike or something, or Matt. And that she was telling him that about Epstein, and that she was mad at her mom, and she yells at her mom, and this big blow up about how, because the mom was really encouraging this kind of shit. That sounds to me totally plausible. And the thing is, you're not in a position, Michael, to know what is likely and not likely for abuse victims. What position are you in to say that that's not, don't you need some expert evidence?
I'm not making any generalized statements about all abuse victims. We're talking about particular alleged victims in a particular circumstance for a particular trial. And it just so happened, like, they couldn't find one victim that was just like unambiguous, straightforward. It's obvious to everybody, if they did an impartial examination of the evidence, that yes, this person really was deplorably child trafficked. Instead, we get Nadia, and then we get Anushka DeGorgiou, aka Kate, who we have to then explain away why into her 30s she's proactively contacting Jeffrey Epstein and offering to come visit him for obvious sexual encounters. Like, I'm sorry, like, if this whole thing is so morally straightforward as everybody takes it to be, shouldn't there be some more evidentially straightforward examples of the trail of victims he left behind?
Well, I think you granted that what most likely happened with Jane was that he was, in fact, now I don't think you're granted the criminal aspect, because you just have a problem with the statutes related to trafficking.
No, I agree. Like, Epstein clearly was not somebody who bought. He had he had like a philosophical problem with statutory ages of consent being arbitrary, according to him. And look, I think they are arbitrary to some extent. If we're told that in Florida it's pedophilia for a consensual sexual encounter to take place with a 17-year-old, but then if you go one state north to Georgia, or you go to New Jersey, or you go to Nevada, I guess that's considered state authorized pedophilia because it's legal there. Again, and people make fun of me for saying this, but I feel like it's a necessary qualifier. Like, this is not like an innate area of interest for me in terms of my own personal, proclivities at all. But like, there is something arbitrary about it. I think he had that worldview where he would find that, like, if somebody was at 17 and seemed like sophisticated enough, that it was a acceptable romantic or sexual prospect for him to pursue. Is that advisable? Is it a good idea? Could it have bad consequences? Sure. But I think,
do you think it should be a crime? Should it be a crime?
Kept in proportion. It's something that should be kept in proportion.
Should it be a crime?
Consensual sexual contact with a 17-year-old? By
By
an adult?
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the allegations, if shown, which are paying for sex for a minor, whatever the age of majority happens to be, assuming an age of majority, should that be legal?
So if we drive north from Florida to Georgia and the age of consent is 16, then prostitution or paying prostitution is illegal for any age. So
Right.
you're saying like maybe it should be extra illegal, or
I think
more
whatever you
severely
think
punished?
of, you said that that the age of consent varies. It's true. Age of consent varies across this country. It's not untrue. But whatever the age of consent is, shouldn't it be illegal to pay for sex from someone who's not at the age of consent? Whatever the democratic will is regarding what the age
But
is.
again, it's illegal for any state. It's illegal for any age, rather.
I'm asking, should it be?
So should prostitution be legal?
Specifically of people who are under the age of majority, whatever that age is.
I guess I would just find it. I'm struggling to answer that, because then certain conduct that is categorically the same, or of the qualitatively the same, would be legal in one state but not another. And I don't know. I find that kind of is arbitrary. So you like, if you want to have a consensual sexual encounter with a 17-year-old in one state, then you just like go across the border and where it's legal.
Well, you could have another
And you're
view
good?
that it should be uniform across the country. I think that there should be uniform laws, although that would run into like the federalism concern, where you seem to also think that it should not be the federal
I don't
government.
really have a strong view one way or another on the
Oh.
age of consent, really. I mean, I think 18 is probably
The perfect
maybe
age.
a little bit high, but like not because of my own personal interests or desires, anybody. It's just because, like, I don't know, it seems to create a lot of issues. I mean, Europe, for God's sake, it must be like the land of state-sanctioned pedophilia if 18 is like the be-all end-all of the age that this must be legally.
Well,
I
want to.
I just think it's circumstantial. Like, if I would have to know more about a particular instance of this happening, because again, it would come to the harm evaluation standard. Like, if there were a circumstance where like there was a harm that was done over the course of this consensual sexual activity that was somehow transactional or involved the exchange of some kind of remuneration, then sure, maybe that would be something that I would find to be more impermissible, and maybe even rise to the level of something that the law should forbid. But I tend to have a high
Bar for criminality.
Yeah, exactly. And
Okay.
so, I mean, I thought everybody was into criminal justice reform and agreeing that over criminalization was a problem and that like prosecutors have way too much power. But it seems on this one set of issues, we want to empower prosecutors and criminalize everything imaginable to the maximum possible extent, but not for anything else. Like, this one area is where I guess all the liberal criminal justice reformers are now hugely invested in expanding the punitive powers of the state.
No, I think that there's legitimate concerns about vagueness and due process for some of these statutes, even sometimes including the Mann Act and some of these other things. I don't think I'd say that those in general aren't legitimate concerns to raise. What I'm trying to say is the conduct here, whatever this conduct is, this seems to be a pattern of abuse that should be sanctioned. I can't. To me, it seems
okay,
like
one of the ironies here is that we've been talking about what the Maxwell evidence that was marshaled at the
Against Maxwell
trial says
Correct.
about Epstein's criminality.
Correct. Yes.
Not about, and it was supposed to be marshaled to demonstrate Maxwell's criminality.
Well,
which is much more tenuous.
So I just want to say I'm marshaling that evidence in this conversation because I think it's a bit like nitpicky to go at AOC and be like, he was not convicted of sex trafficking, when in the course of coming to the determinations of the Maxwell case, agreed, Epstein was dead, but there is a determination by a court and by a jury that necessitates a finding that Epstein was trafficking minors.
It's not.
I think it is a nitpick.
What AOC was saying was that Howard Lutnick in 2015 should have been so repulsed by what Epstein had been convicted of 7 years before that
That's what Lutnick said. Wait, hang on. That's what Lutnick said. Just to be clear, first off.
I mean, that lie was absurd.
Okay.
So I acknowledge that, of course.
Sure.
But AOC is saying that Epstein should have had it in his mind as of 2015 that Epstein had been convicted of.
He should have.
Lutnick should have had it in his.
He should have. The reason he should have is the following. Yeah, no,
hold on a second. Hold on a second. So
Yeah.
maybe we can. Maybe we. This is a more general thing that we're
Sure.
getting, so we can move on from the legal
Yeah.
technicalities of the Maxwell trial. Although I could go on about that as well.
I know.
But like, do you really agree, or do you accept, or do you think it's valid for it now to be a tenet of anybody who's right-minded to proclaim that, of course, anybody who has like of sound mind or is ethical should have refused to ever associate or even with or even email Jeffrey Epstein post 2008 because the crimes that he was convicted of were so heinous that he could never be associated with again, and therefore Chomsky's reputation is in tatters. Howard Lutnick, let's set aside the lie. Let's just like talk about the association. That means that he must be banished from polite society.
So to answer you directly,
and Reid Hoffman and everybody, they are sullied for all time because they didn't say to themselves, look, this guy got convicted on 2 prostitution charges in 2008. Therefore, nobody can ever have anything to do with him again, even though he completed his sentence and was permitted to re-enter society. Like, do you think that's a sound
I'm happy to answer
of
directly.
this issue? Yeah.
So I think the answer is no, I'm not committed to that view, that anyone, no matter how attenuated their attenuation, ought be treated like scum because of that. I mean, I think you could treat the scientists looking for handouts differently than, Sam Harris, differently than Lutnick, differently than Maxwell. So the nature and context, of course, matters in terms of what's going on with the associations. And
who does deserve to be condemned?
Yeah, so I think Lutnick, on his own view, deserves to be condemned. On his own view and applying his own standard.
Condemned for the brazen, ridiculous lie. I agree with that.
And to the extent that we think that someone like Lutnick, in the position of Lutnick, if there's a basis to believe that now I'm not saying that there is a basis to believe that the criminal conduct continued past 2005, 2006. If there is such a basis, I think that would also be a grounds to condemn that individual. But in general, I believe in like rehabilitation, that kind of shit. But it just kind of seems like Epstein didn't really think he did anything wrong. It just kind of seems like this guy is a piece of shit and continued to be a piece of shit and continue to try to downplay, continue to think that he was a victim. And so, yeah, in general, am I committed to rehabilitation, that kind of stuff? Yes. But this guy seems like a piece of garbage.
Okay, but maybe you think it's a piece of garbage, or he continued to maintain that he didn't do anything wrong, which is more or less true. I mean, he would definitely put the most charitable possible spin on his past conduct when he would be asked about it, or you can find records in the House.
Yeah, he wasn't apologetic. He didn't say, yes, I abused. Yeah.
Right. No, I agree. But okay, but bracketing that, in terms of his actual conduct, I think everybody just seems to assume by default that the conduct must have continued post 2008 in terms of illicit sexual activity. Okay, then if you don't, then I'm not sure on what, even the guy still continues to contest the validity of the charges that he had to plead guilty to. Wouldn't the more important factor in terms of evaluating whether associating with him or even developing a friendship with him was condemnatory or condemnable? Wouldn't the more important factor be whether
it continues?
Sort of illicit,
not necessarily.
Sexual contact continued?
No, let me give you an example. So, for example, O.J. Simpson, right? Officially acquitted by the criminal process, our process here. If someone said to me, you know what? I watched that whole trial. I think that motherfucker did it. And until he acknowledges that, I don't want to be around a person who doesn't take ownership of what they did and actually reconciles with it and makes amends. I think that's totally consistent, and you wouldn't need to see additional murders or homicides for it to be a good idea.
The analogy breaks down because that was a double homicide. With Epstein, I know prostitution charges.
I know that.
When did prostitution become as bad as double homicide?
It's called a comparison. It's to demonstrate. I could do the same thing with like someone who defrauded.
I'm just saying it's disanalogous. It's disanalogous. Like,
I'm not comparing it for the magnitude of the crime. I'm not comparing it in any other respect other than there is a consistent basis for someone to be upset, continuing upset at a past wrong, if in the mind of a reasonable person, and I think a reasonable person in their position would think that they haven't made amends, that they haven't reconciled, they haven't apologized, anything like that, that regardless of the crime, whether it's theft or whatever.
I just think that we should probably hinge this more to the magnitude of the crime. No,
Um,
because like
par-
double homicide is kind of a different order of severity, I would think, than
I agree.
prostitution.
I think I want to go out there. I'm going to be bold.
Otherwise,
I think murder
nobody
is
should
worse.
associate
I think
with Elliot Spitzer ever again because he got caught with prostitutes.
I just want to be clear about something. I do think that murder is worse. I think that murder is worse. I just want to make that 100% clear. I'm not comparing Michael. I'm not comparing murder to procuring child for anything other than what you were trying to ask me, which is like, wouldn't you need to see some continuing course of conduct for you to be justified in disassociating yourself? That's not true. If you feel that the initial act,
let's move to a new thought experiment then, or a new way to look at this. As to specifically the magnitude of the crime.
Yes.
Do you think the magnitude of the crime ought to have compelled everybody refusing to ever have anything to do with him for the rest of his life?
Absent a recognition of fault and absent making amends in a way where I feel that they did something wrong, absent that, I think that is justified. Yes, I do. Now, I'm not going to...
from my own perspective, and I've thought about this because, I'm asked about this from every direction. I just think that if I was asked in 2015 to go attend a soiree at Epstein's townhouse, and I did a quick Google search on him, and I found that he pleaded guilty to 2 prostitution offenses and served a sentence.
I'm not.
And at the
Michael,
soiree
I'm not saying
would have
that.
been, I don't know, Woody Allen and Ehud Barak.
But Michael, I'm not saying that. No, I grant what you're saying.
And some scientists.
I grant what you're saying.
I don't know that I would have felt that I was crossing an ethical red line by
different associations.
I
totally like different associations. I think in different natures of contacts are going to be justified by different things. Yeah, if I'm just going to a place where a bunch of other people are invited, then I don't think that there's a necessary connection. That's why I think everyone like showing just pictures by itself. I think that is kind of witch hunt. I mean, you compared it to the Salem witch trials. I think that there's a lot of truth to what you're saying in terms of the mania. I started this by agreeing with you in that point specifically. But in general, yeah, if you have a very close connection such that you're bringing your children and your whole family to Epstein Island after you lied about it.
Do you think Chomsky did something that was morally wrong?
I think that Chomsky did something wrong unless I knew that he didn't speak with him privately and was assuaged of either his innocence or the fact that in his mind that he made amends or something, he did something wrong. And I think that's okay. Do you agree with that?
I think we more or less know what Chomsky thought. I mean, it's in the emails that have been swept up into these record productions. He felt that, at least as of 2019, when the fever pitch was reaching a peak around what Epstein supposedly had done that was so world historically awful, Chomsky regarded it as hysteria. So that's what Chomsky apparently believed, and apparently he actually did have, which was surprising for me to discover, because I didn't know this. I knew they had some dealings with Epstein, but the extent of the relationship and the closeness of it and the fondness that they genuinely seemed to feel toward one another, I hadn't realized until recently. But to the degree that we know what Chomsky's view on it was, is that he regarded a lot of this as hysteria, and he believed that once Epstein served his sentence, the slate was wiped clean, and he was allowed to reenter society, notwithstanding, I guess, his reluctance to make amends or acknowledge fault for the 2008 convictions. That was Chomsky's view.
Would you be friends with Epstein?
If you think that look, I mean, I'm just trying to be honest. I don't know. I mean, of course, no.
If you found him an entertaining and sociable person, would it be wrong for you to be friends with Epstein? Yeah.
I think possibly. Look, if I observed him committing sexual abuse on a child, then no. Then it would be my obligation to report that to the police and prevent any further sexual abuse against children. But barring that,
well, let's say you knew it happened 10 minutes earlier. And for whatever reason,
if I had known that he had abused a child 10 minutes earlier,
yeah, I mean, clearly there's some reasonability here, right? Like, if you think,
I don't know how I would have known that, because he wasn't even alleged to have committed any wrongful sexual conduct.
I hear you. I just think that
2005, 2015. What? I don't know what grounds I would have to refuse to entertain socializing opportunities with him.
I'm not saying it with respect to all socializing opportunities, but I think if you're trying to create a close either business or friendship with somebody, I think that there are some expectations of people. If you genuinely feel that there's remorse or something, I watched this incredible play in New York. I think it was called Downstate. And it was about the lives of like child and sex offenders. And it really challenged the viewer. And I'm not taking the position that if you do one of these heinous acts, I think that you should be for the rest of your life committed to banishment and isolation. I believe in reform. I believe in rehabilitation and treatment, that kind of thing. And even to someone like Epstein, but it just doesn't seem like there's enough evidence to suggest that he took his crime seriously, that he understood the nature of it. They understand why it was bad.
He didn't see it as heinous.
Which is bad,
yes, he didn't see it as heinous.
Which is bad. And if he doesn't view it as heinous, I don't want to fuck with him.
On the scale of severity of potential sex crimes, I mean, of which obviously there are quite a few in terms of what people get convicted of, like the sex offender registry and laws that criminalize sexual misconduct or wrongful sexual actions. I think there's a lot of problems with them, and the sex offender registry itself is like anti-constitutional in so many ways. But it's like,
but put that aside. But
I'm saying, leaving that aside, like there are some heinous sex crimes that could be committed, and even somebody who did commit a heinous sex crime at some point in their life, even then, I don't know that I would refuse to associate with them or even become friendly with them. Look, that's just not how I operate. Like, I like to kind of meet and talk to anybody and like form some sorts of relationship with anybody. And like, I just don't think that let's say there was like a genuinely heinous sex crime that somebody committed, and I'm kind of like friendly with the person on some basis, having encounter. Yeah, I don't know how I would have met them necessarily, but I meet them in some way. I just don't think I'm tainted by that friendship. Like, I didn't commit the sex crime. I'm friendly with somebody who did something bad in their past. But when it comes to Epstein, yeah, he did refuse to sort of like melodramatically atone for what he did because he didn't regard it as heinous. I don't really think it's remotely as heinous as plenty of other sex crimes that could have possibly committed. Remember, I told you before, this detective, he interviewed every girl in the Palm Beach phase from which the conviction eventually arose. And according to him, if the girls had all been 18 rather than a subset of them being 16 or 17, and there was like one outlier where the 14-year-old sort of had the investigation initiated. If all of them happened to be 18 rather than 16 or 17, then all would have been consensual adult activity, right?
If he forcibly held her down and penetrated her, would you feel the same way?
No, because that would be actual.
Well, I think that
against their will.
What we're finding is that the law you don't agree with the law on statutory. You don't agree that these things.
We're talking about gradations of heinousness.
Sure.
A forcible rape is more heinous than a consensual sex act, right?
I mean, I think that it depends on the nature of it. I think it does depend. Yeah, you can find some examples. I think. Yeah, okay. Wait. So I'll give you an example. A 4-year-old.
There, I would say it's obvious that the 4-year-old cannot consent to.
So that's all I'm saying. So, that's all I'm saying is that
is a 16 or 17-year-old.
I think in general, a forcible aggravated penetration would be worse in most cases. I'm not denying that. I'm just asking about your threshold. It seems that you were willing to bite the bullet. Like, I should not be associated, or I shouldn't be tarred with the criminal actions of another. Well, it seems like your intuitions would turn on at some threshold, and that threshold is not yet reached when it comes to what Epstein is accused of. And my father always
if someone was like a legitimate mass child rapist and was like an active danger to any child he might come across, then yeah, that would be a threshold. But it's just not what we're talking about.
My father used to tell me, "Dime con quién tú andas y te diré quién eres," which is Spanish. Tell me with who you go, and I'll tell you who you are. Now, I don't believe in collective guilt or collective punishment, but I think it's a bit much for you to ascribe like hypocrisy to people who say, "Well, I see what he's doing. I see like he's kind of like an asshole. He kind of doesn't seem to at all be trying to make amends in any way, an authentic way to make us think that he changed in terms of how he views what he did, or actually
did he
apologize.
Make amends by waiving his ability to contest
I'm trying to distinguish between I'm trying to distinguish between legal amends and a person that gets to who they are, right? Yeah, sure, I'll pay off these $1 million. Just shut the fuck up. Get out of here. It was closer to that.
His behavior to some extent, meaning he didn't. He probably recognized that he was foolish, to say the least, to even put him in a position where like there could be girls coming who maybe he might have.
Yeah, but there was no.
And he stopped doing that. So he did change his behavior to some degree.
Maybe he changed his behavior in the sense that we don't have evidence that it persisted. I don't have any evidence of that. But in terms of the acknowledgement, in terms of the contrition,
think we might have that by now? I mean, how much more evidence could we possibly acquire on this thing?
Well, I think that on the basis of what we have so far, I'm much more likely to say that there's no evidence of it and therefore it didn't happen. I'm not saying that it definitively did not happen. I'm just saying there's no evidence of it. That's all.
You can never say definitively much in life. I mean, I can't say definitively that the sun will rise tomorrow, but like more or less is probably going to happen.
What I want to say though is I don't think you can accuse people of hypocrisy when it comes to certain standards of
I didn't accuse anyone of hypocrisy.
Oh, if you do accuse people of like, being too rough on
hypocrisy
Lutnick,
is my problem.
Stay away from AOC. She's fine to criticize Lutnick. There's nothing wrong with criticizing Lutnick. He's a bastard. He lied. And he claimed on his own standard that he thought he was disgusting, and he should be held to that. Because guess what? He had a reputation.
There's anything wrong with criticizing Lutnick. I've criticized Lutnick for the absurd brazenness of this ridiculous lie that he told. I was criticizing AOC for once again making up what somebody was legally convicted of doing. Like, why can't anybody just ever stay?
She made a mistake, but he was doing that. She shouldn't have said convicted. That she had the co-conspirator was convicted in helping Epstein do the things, but he did the things.
It wasn't
Michael.
about the criticism of Lutnick per se.
No, it's the term conviction that you're like, oh my God, AOC. She said convicted when he was only convicted of sex, prostitution of a minor in Florida. He wasn't actually convicted of trafficking, even though he would have been because he died. I mean, like, really? That's what you're criticizing AOC for?
It seems
like a nitpick.
He would have been convicted. I mean, maybe he would have. Maybe he would.
You're the one who says the evidence is much stronger for Epstein than of. Isn't that like an argument from
it would have
a fortiori?
It's likely that he would have been convicted, but but one of the things that still makes me a bit wary of the circumstances of his death was that he still had some reasonably practical legal avenue, some reasonably tenable legal avenues still to pursue at the time that he died, including having a bail hearing in a few days. And like, they hadn't even tested really any of the evidence at all yet. And like the feds had to concoct a theory for how the charges that they were bringing against him circumvented the non-prosecution agreement, even though they were charging stuff that happened in Florida at the same period, but then tying into something that allegedly happened in New York. So that had yet to really be litigated.
So you're much more open, and I've heard you say this, of criticisms or conspiracy questioning regarding the manner of Epstein's death. And in particular, we have these allegations from his brother and this other autopsy that seem to suggest that maybe we're not getting the full story. I'll give you, some time. Talk about that real quick, and then I want to finish on some rapid fire stuff.
Okay. I've always just said that my confidence interval is much lower as to this aspect of the Epstein mythology, let's say, than any other aspect. So I just say I have reasonable doubt as to the circumstances of the death. And if you had to make me guess, or if you put a gun to my head, I would say most likely suicide still. But again, just reasonable doubt, especially because, 2.5 weeks prior, he turns up injured, right? And he tells the prison psychologist that he was attacked by his cellmate, and then he revises it later and says he doesn't remember. So it's just unclear what happened in that first incident. But
he's dead. You believe he's dead?
Yeah, I mean, we see the autopsy photos. Thomas Massey doesn't believe he's dead. Thomas Massey thinks he's alive.
You see the AI picture going around of him in Tel Aviv? And I want to mention there. I want to say that there is an undeniable, and this is another point that I think you made where I totally agree. Anti-Semitic bent to a lot of, and you can't deny it, to a lot of the stories that are being pushed out there. I'm not saying that all of them are, But I do think that is that is true, and there's a lot of fake information out there.
Yeah, it's just, but and it's not even like, it's not even, it's indisputably anti-Semitic in that it's open. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
how that fuels a lot of the algorithmic fervor around this stuff. It's not like people criticizing Israel and then being accused of being anti-Semitic, right? It's like people who like openly espouse an unapologetic anti-Semitic worldview, pretty much, who think that this is like the Rosetta Stone that proves that their worldview is right.
Okay. Final rapid fire stuff. Who's number one in terms of your most wanting to debate on the Epstein issue? Who either refuses or hasn't debated you yet?
I mean, I would love to go. I would love to spend 2 hours and 45 minutes with Whitney Webb, since she
Yep.
has such a cult following, since everybody loves to proclaim her to be like the leading expert in the alt media. Oh, you know what? That might be interesting, but like, she talk about a rapid fire round, like she just spills out such a deluge of like claim after claim after claim that it can be hard to parse in like a structured way. So that one might be a little bit dicey, but I think Julie K. Brown would be very edifying,
All right.
because I've never heard her explain why it is that she thought that it was okay to fabricate quotes in her book Perversion of Justice that was inspired by the Miami Herald series, or why just today I saw that she made up something about this Epstein house attendant being
Killed.
suspiciously killed in
Yeah.
jail,
When he died
or
of
all
cancer or
manner of
something.
other stuff. Yeah, he was out of jail for over a year. I mean, I had to investigate this because Whitney Webb made this claim, and didn't seem right to me. So I went and did like, got the Bureau of Prison Records and got everything. And like the guy died like a year after, over a year after he was uh, after he left prison, and he died of cancer. So I mean, but this is like one of the mythological. It's one of the myths that won't die. It's like when people actually think that Epstein literally called his plane the Lolita Express. It's just like one of that stuff. I guess there's no incentive for any of these myths to be dispelled, because anybody could just say whatever they want, and then it foments the mass hysteria.
You said before that you respected Breaking Points, you respected Ryan Grimm and Ro Khanna. Do you still respect them?
It's becoming tougher to retain respect. Like, I mean, I don't have like a full. I don't respect Ryan Grimm's coverage of this story. I think he's done good reporting over the course of his career. Like, I've gotten along with him on a personal level. Like, I don't dislike him personally, but I don't respect his approach to the story at all. I think it functionally just serves to foment the continuation of the mass hysteria and moral panic. He actually is like criticized. He's one of these people who criticizes excessive transparency and disclosure as well, by like, you know, bending over backwards to show how sensitive he is to concealing any victim identifying information and so forth, even though he had it available at one point, because like this Palestinian group hacked some emails from Ehud Barak, and I forget which and that's where his like drop site stories were. That's what they were. The initial few of them was based on, but he's all about, you know, protecting victims, and he just like declares, oh yeah, by the way, there were like thousands of child for which he can provide no evidence. And he's one of these people who like figured out that algorithmically it's like really popular to just focus on like the intelligence aspect, even though fundamentally this was like no one would even know to speculate on any intelligence ties that Epstein might have had if not for the underlying like sex trafficking theory, right? But he thinks he could just kind of bypass that and just kind of like assume it's true and just gesture at it as though it's proven fact, and then layer stuff on top that adds to this sort of pyramid scheme of intrigue, to reuse that term. So I don't have any. I have less and less respect for him. Ro Khanna, much less now. I mean, Thomas Massey, I used to actually really like him. I thought he was like one of the few members of Congress, along with Ro Khanna, that I had any respect for at all, because he would, you know, challenge Trump, challenge the Republicans. He actually was highly knowledgeable about the intricacies of like legislative procedure, so he could explain to you what was going on in the Rules Committee, and he was pretty perceptive in terms of noticing things like for example, he like came out when the in 2024 when they passed the TikTok ban, he actually came out and provided a very cogent, sort of like last minute, because like they sprung it on everyone. I forget the timeline now.
Yeah, it was
But
pretty
they
late in the
expedited
Biden.
it.
Yeah.
Well, but I'm saying they introduced, like they did, so they pulled some maneuver where they introduced the bill like without any notice essentially, and then so he had to like rush to develop an argument, and he gave a pretty compelling speech, kind of last minute on the floor of the House, and rallied some opposition to the bill, and there's stuff like that. So I mean, but now he's just off the reservation.
Okay.
And so I mean, Ro Khanna apparently thinks he's going to be running for president, and
I think that's clear.
He's
Yeah,
rehearsing his stump speech, which is we have to purge the Epstein class. So
and John Ossoff memorably had listen. I don't have any problem with Democrats making hay of the at least lies and seeming incompetence, if not outright corruption,
even if it perpetuates moral.
As long as they make disclaimer, as long as in my mind they make disclaimers and they don't make any unjustified claims, I'm fine with it.
Have you seen any of them making disclaimers?
Some of them have not made disclaimers, and I criticize it when it happens. But in terms of the general approach, saying let's look at what they did with the Epstein files, I have no problem with that. Next question: strongly agree, strongly disagree, no opinion on the following. Ghislaine Maxwell should be pardoned.
I do have an opinion on that. I think that she more than deserves, or it would be more than warranted to give her some degree of clemency, whether it's a full pardon or a commutation, whatever. I don't think it is justifiable for her to be sitting in prison at the moment. So that's my opinion.
Awesome. And the last one, do you condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
You know, I did on February 24th, 2022, I did something that I almost never do, which is that I said, okay, I'm actually going to like make a moralizing declaration right now and just straightforwardly say, denounce essentially in moral terms the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So I already did that. Of course, it didn't insulate me from still being accused of being some kind of Russian asset, because, you know, I criticize, you know, just the credulous regurgitation of war propaganda, but I've already done that. And no, I actually do think it is a horrible atrocity from multiple angles. I mean, like, why are hundreds of thousands of corpses still piling up in the Donbass again? Can anybody explain that? And oh, by the way, I thought Trump was supposed to solve it in 24 hours, but anyway,
yeah, didn't get to
that's another subject.
Yeah. Listen, Michael, I do appreciate, I think we have some differences on some of our views here, but I do appreciate that there are journalists who are willing to at least be skeptical. And I think that there is a reason to be skeptical for a lot of people peddling claims that they have done no homework on. And it shows oftentimes when you have these debates with Epstein maximalists that they haven't even done the, scratch the surface. And so for all of our disagreements, I do appreciate you.
What do you think? Just to like
Yeah.
last quick question for you, like,
Sure.
what do you observe as some of the most pernicious or lamentable aspects of how this issue is now operating in the public sphere? Like, what would you concede is the worst thing in terms of something connected to a moral panic or mass hysteria type development?
Yeah, I think that one is, even though I think it's politically useful for Democrats to take advantage of it, and right now, given the state of the Trump administration, which I don't know if you agree with me on, I think that we are fighting against an authoritarian regime that wants to, attack free speech, attack rights all along the way. I have my view on the political aspect of it, but in less, crazy times, I think it's taking up way too much bandwidth. The fact that we have 500, whatever number of attorneys working on these redactions. I mean, I've done document productions before, and it is hell to just work with like thousands of redactions to make sure that they're like consistent among each other, these kinds of decisions. So I'm going to be honest, there's a reason.
And Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie say there are 3 million more or 2 million more, right? I don't know how true that is, or
it's a really,
or what.
really fucking big job. So I think that they should have just, I'm going to be honest, because of the public promises made by the Trump administration, they should have just released them all. And I don't think that it's.
I agree. Hallelujah. Yeah. They could have done that, right?
Yeah,
they could have drafted the
No, I have a view.
In such a way that they just release them all.
Yeah.
Rather than this like tedious, painstaking redaction.
I have a suspicion. I don't know if you agree with this actually, and I think it's a little bit sinister. Even though I do like Ro Khanna and I like the way that Massie fucks with Trump a lot, I think it's a little sinister, this law. And the reason I think it's sinister is I think the document production side of it is written as broad as possible, but it gives such deference and such big potential carve-outs for the permissive redactions, that the people who are claiming the maximalist theories that have yet to been proven will always be able to claim some amount of vindication. And I think that that's part of the purpose. There's no cause of action within the statute either. And one of the things that I thought was preposterous that Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie did is they tried to intervene in the Maxwell decision. Well, as you know, Maxwell was found guilty, in 2022, and like her appeals are essentially exhausted. And they're just like trying to come to the court as amicus briefs when they have no standing. They have no standing, and they could have written a cause of action. Everyone saw it there.
It was rejected.
Yeah, and so what they're trying to do, I think, is they're trying to. This is maximally annoying law for Trump, because I think he's going to be in court like arguing in favor of his own redactions and attorney-client privilege. And there is something, I think, sinister about that, or at least cynical about how that was done. I'd rather they just release them all.
I couldn't agree more. I don't know why. I mean, I was trying to bang this drum since they introduced the thing over the summer, and nobody listened.
That said,
and now it's just a mess, and it's never going to end, because there's never going to come a time, given the piecemeal sort of like inconsistent redaction fracas, there's never going to come a time where people are going to be satisfied. Okay, and they'll say, "All right, we agree. Sufficient files have been released, and we're all good."
But Michael, the thing is, when you say mythology, you're correct about one aspect of it, which is it presupposes guilt. The theory, the view of the Epstein maximalists presuppose guilt.
Right.
Why are we talking about document productions? We should be talking about convictions, charging decisions, that kind of stuff. The whole reason we're here and that we're having to do document productions is because no one trusts the government. But of course, releasing all these documents isn't going to give the maximalists what they want, because they presuppose in their mythology that there is this wide sweeping corruption that gets a bunch of other people. And so to the extent that that is not found.
Or they see a list of co-conspirators at some phase in the investigation, which of course they don't have the context to understand to interpret correctly. So they think if there's just like a list of co-conspirators, that means that whoever had drafted that list asserted it's beyond a reasonable doubt they could convict anybody of being a co-conspirator.
That's one example. Another is when they have that date thing. We're like, oh, look, the date is off in this communique that was made about Epstein's death. It shows they had prior. No, lawyers work off templates. It's very plausible that that would have been a template from the day before, or that the template didn't work, or it captured the previous date. I mean, there's just so many explanations for this. But
one of the ironies is that, like, so most of the co-conspirators on that list are women who were named in the 2008 non-prosecution agreement and are now deemed to have been victims, because some of them have actually filed lawsuits now claiming they too were victimized, but they were treated as co-conspirators, and like were like one of them, Leslie Roth and Sarah Kellen, definitely, like, they used the co-conspirator designation as leverage to compel her to give a proffer statement.
I think you go too far with some of
people are not going to like pause and learn like what phase these documents reflect as to the chronology of the investigation. They're going to claim that, it must be some cover up of perpetrators, and like Wexner was investigated, and he also gave a proffer statement ultimately, and it was found that he was not complicit in any criminality.
Yeah, no, I think that
Bradley Edwards, the victim lawyer, said years ago that he never found Wexner to have been culpable in anything. So
I think people need to keep in mind
the story is that you need such an insane amount of background knowledge to like know how to properly interpret these like disparate files that get flooded out onto social media. That
it's actually hard. Yeah,
crazy making. Yeah,
it's actually hard. And it's not just this. It's the allegations against Burisma. It's all these other, in my opinion, uncorroborated, unsubstantiated claims. And keeping in mind the procedural posture is really important. You shouldn't just like forget that this is a prosecution, and a prosecution is one side of the story. And we would never just accept wholesale, a regular indictment, let alone a draft indictment, right? So it is very important to keep that in mind, and that's something that I totally understand. I think you go too far sometimes with like the prosecutorial pressure thing that you say, but like it is true that you need to keep in mind that these documents need to be referred to in their context.
I have always been sort of like dispositionally sympathetic to the defense in virtually every context. I don't know what to tell you. That's just like my nature, I guess. So not that can be overridden like in truly extreme cases or whatever, but like in terms of like where my reflexes are, that I'm just always skeptical.
Defense oriented. Yeah.
The prosecutorial power of the government.
No, I think that is a fine like inclination to have. I think you go a bit further with the substantive laws for sure, but like I think that's a fine inclination to have. But let me be honest with you, I'm in the triage mode in terms of how I view this administration as so fucking corrupt, so horrible that I don't mind them getting bogged down, because I think that anytime they have access to an easier situation, they're just going to use it to take away our rights. They're just going to use it to embed their corruption. So I mean, you asked me the question like, what's the worst thing about these Epstein files? Yeah, that there are false accusations for sure, defamation for sure, and bandwidth in normal circumstances. But right now, I think I want Democrats to be ruthless and to use again, don't lie, but use this to target the administration, because we need it. We need it to defend against the encroachments of the administration.
For me, like bogging down the administration is not a worthy price to pay, to be paid for.
Cat's out of the bag there.
Cat's out of the bag. I like to me, it's not a worthwhile trade-off if what we get is the administration is bogged down, but we also get the mass public believing that though there was mass child being done that was covered up. Because you know what, as I said yesterday, it's hard to imagine anything that would drive like a mentally unwell person to homicidal mania than to convince them that, like, thousands of American children were in like one of the most grievous atrocities in history, and it continues to be covered up, and the perpetrators are running around with impunity. Like I just don't like, that's not a belief that you would want to foster, especially if it's false. Like if it was true, then okay, that's a big problem. We should all.
Yeah, I just don't think the Democrat rank and file.
Like I don't know. I think they're got to be sort of almost like a little bit sick to think that it's worthwhile to disseminate that fictitious belief.
I just don't think the Democratic rank and file are like these QAnoners in that sense. And you can.
I disagree.
Yeah, I know, because you're going to point to. We should have a conversation about Russia.
QAnon is like mainstream now.
Well, no, I said Democratic
faithful. Why are schools around the United States canceling their school picture day because they think all the photos are being funneled into like some database? That's happened.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was talking about Democratic faithful. I mean, are you talking about some other denominator?
Well, Democratic faithful. Okay, how about just like normie people then? No people without a strong partisan preference.
I'm not sure
what the news consumers.
I'm not sure what the view is, but to me, it's overdetermined. That's happening whether you like it or not. And the Democrats, I don't think, are doing much additional harm there. And I agree that they shouldn't go and say things that are untrue and foster it in ways.
Like if we did a poll right now and we polled Democrats, what percentage of them you would say yes to the question? Do you think that Donald Trump covered up mass child?
I think the majority would say yes, but I think that they would say it even if they didn't have. No, but they would say it even irrespective of what Democratic politicians are saying. They would say that no matter what. They hate Trump, and they already think he's a sex criminal. So to me, it's kind of overdetermined. But I'll just put it to the side. Like, yeah, I think that there's a danger. The harder that you put into it, that you're kind of tagging Biden and Merrick Garland as like covering, as being complicit in this, and I think that is. Like,
I know this is a Republican talking point, but like if it's as bad as we're told it is. Yeah. Why didn't anybody do anything during the Biden administration?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is like there's discrete criminality, there's discrete investigations that are justified and proper, and the kind of conversation that we had about the merits of what was going on with the Maxwell case, and that's the extent to which I see evidence for, and where people can have that argument, whatever. But no, I don't think that Merrick Garland covered up Matt, and I think it's irresponsible for I'm like the last stand of Merrick Garland left anywhere. But no, I think that there's definitely some danger here. But the proximate danger for me is the Trump administration, this illegitimate president of ours. And so, yeah, I don't advocate for lying, but if I'm going to use this anger, and I think the Democrats should use the anger in their rhetoric against the administration, because we need to stop them.
I mean, my apprehension would more be that Trump will have extra motivation to, I don't know, go to war with Iran or something. Not so much that not so
because of Epstein.
Because like he wants. I mean, wag the dog. I don't know. I mean, like that would be a good way to like change everybody's attention. I don't think he would do that specifically because of Epstein, but
now you're confirming all these anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists.
Why would that be?
It's a joke. It's a joke. No. Because they say that Epstein was there involved to take control of the government and get their war with Iran.
No, I'm just saying to like change the public discourse right now toward something else rather than Trump being complicit in a child trafficking cover-up.
Which, by the way, I want to say in terms of the cover-up aspect of it, I mean, they admittedly lied, right? I mean, the administration has been lying. Trump himself said that this is all a made-up hoax invented by Obama. And so to that extent, that is a cover-up, right? He's covering up what's actually there.
He also said, according to Marjorie Taylor Greene, that one reason why he was opposed to this Epstein Files Transparency Act is because, quote, people could get hurt. And I guess people have gotten hurt insofar as they've been wrongly impugned or defamed.
Like, right? He gives a fuck about that. That's the thing. Like he gives a fuck about that. He doesn't give a fuck about that. He cares about himself.
He might have known that his commerce secretary was involved or something, right? Or Elon Musk.
Right. But he doesn't like love Lutnick. He doesn't feel you know him. You know what kind of guy Trump is. And so, yeah, I would say it's fair to say that Trump is covering it up because he's lying about it, right?
People have gotten hurt.
Okay. It's a true and accurate statement that some people have gotten hurt. The difference is he's lying about the nature of what's in the files. How is that not definitionally a cover up? He's covering up what actually took place with this fake story.
About the nature of what's in the files.
He said Obama made the files. Obama made the files.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
That's definitionally a cover up, in my opinion. So I have no problem using that terminology. They've lied about like what. Think about Pam Bondi's whole about face.
Bluster for him to communicate.
Bluster. That's what we call knowing and deliberate and intentional lies.
What was covered up?
He attempted to cover up the true nature of the files, whatever that is. He attempted to cover it up. He attempted to
characterize what the files were.
Okay,
whether they covered something up.
I don't know how it's not right. Isn't a cover up trying to not reveal what's actually in the files?
I thought what we thought was being covered up was like the sex trafficking conspiracy.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you can say. I'm just saying you would agree it is a cover up to like knowingly, intentionally lie and mischaracterize what's in the files so as not to release them. That's a cover up. Maybe not of the thing you're talking about. It's a cover up.
I think his brain is so idle that I don't even know if you could say that he was.
You treat him like a fucking baby. You treat him so he can never lie. I mean, the guy lies as he breathes.
Accurate.
Okay, so
anyway, there are certain hoax aspects of this. It is a Democratic hoax in a way, not entirely, not exclusively, but when the Democrats on the House Oversight Committee push out their tranche of files that they got from the Epstein estate, and there's a photo of Trump, and they decide to arbitrarily black out the faces of the women that are with Trump in some bikini party photo, or they black out Virginia.
That's no more or less what the DOJ is doing right now, which could be characterized as a cover up.
They did it in such a way so it was most suggestive of Trump being guilty of some wrongdoing, and then they blast that out, that one little email snippet on social media before anything else, and say, "Look, we found Trump did X, Y, and Z."
Wait.
In that sense, it is being weaponized against Trump in a way that you could call a hoax because it was false.
Hang on a second. What's false? What's false?
They portrayed it.
What's false?
The Democrats were not truthful in how they portrayed those.
You're saying it's a material. It's a material omission to block that out.
Yeah,
so then Trump is perpetuating the DOJ is perpetuating a hoax.
To seemingly implicate Trump in something in which he was not actually implicated.
So the DOJ is perpetuating a hoax on your own terms, on your own view. It's a hoax. What the DOJ is doing. They're blocking things out. The fact that they're blocking out victim information on your own view. The same terms, Michael. You just said the Democrats are complicit in a hoax. So is the DOJ. They're doing the exact same thing. It's a hoax, isn't it?
The DOJ is complicit in a hoax insofar as they're affording far undue deference to, yes, the hoax.
In the same way the Democrats are. In the same way the Democrats are that you just described.
There are a lot of guilty parties.
Is there a reason you won't Is there a reason you won't agree to those terminology? I mean, you just use that terminology as to the Democrats to imply that, you know what, Trump has a point. But his DOJ is doing the same thing. If that's all it takes for a hoax, then I guess everyone's complicit in a hoax to the extent that they're redacting anything.
How would you characterize House Democrats, House Oversight Committee Democrats putting out an email snippet where it's like Epstein saying like Donald knows about the girls, and like they black out Virginia Roberts Giuffre, and then that is in tandem with a photo of Trump at some bikini party or something where the girls' faces are blacked out and there's no claim that they were ever victimized, and then that's.
Well, Virginia, wait. Didn't Giuffre claim that Trump, at least at one point in time, I mean, there is a claim, isn't there? I could be wrong about that.
She never claimed Trump victimized her. No, she actually exonerated Trump in terms of any sexual victimization.
There was, wait. So Giuffre never herself accused Trump? I could be wrong about that. All right.
The opposite.
Okay.
She
I know that later she, yes.
Trump never did anything to her.
I know that later she said that, but I thought that there is an explicit.
She was actually consistent on that point.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong about that.
But
there are people who accuse Trump.
Tampered with an email.
Tampered with, and so did the DOJ, and so did the DOJ. They tampered with all these emails. Okay, on the same terms.
I agree, but the Democrats tampered with that one email specifically to make it seem as though it implicated Trump in a sex crime against Virginia Roberts Giuffre, when she expressly always went out of her way to exonerate Trump.
Wait. That he knew about it, right? That he knew about it. Isn't the suggestion that he knew about it?
Actually,
like, but isn't the suggestion, which has not been unproven, that Trump knew about it? Unless your claim is Giuffre was never abused ever.
No, the claim in what was suggested by the way the Democrats tampered with this one email was that there was a claim of sexual predation by Trump against Virginia.
That Trump knew about it, or
no, that he perpetrated it, or he's like complicit in it. I have to go double check the actual email, but it was something in that vein.
All right,
anyway, it was a scurrilous little ploy that they did. That it's in its own category in terms of a hoax. I would say, like, I have a huge objections to how the DOJ is handling all this in the whole manner of ways. I just think, it's kind of a different nature than what the Democrats did to just circumstance.
In that what the Democrats did is worse?
I'm not saying it's better or worse. It's just they were trying to go after Trump. It's nothing new, but it just gives you some insight into why Trump would have these outbursts where he says hoax or whatever about the Epstein files. Because of how they've been weaponized against him.
Wait a second. So here's the email is from Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell. I want you to realize that the dog that hasn't barked is Trump. Blank spent hours at my house with him. He has never once been mentioned, police chief, etc. I'm 75% there. And then Ghislaine Maxwell says, exactly. I've been thinking about that.
Right. So why did they redact Virginia Roberts Giuffre's name? Maybe because if they just left the name there, that we could add the context that she actually proactively exonerated Trump of any sexual wrongdoing.
Or it's because it's a victim name.
But if it's just generic victim, well, no.
That's it. Then it's the exact same thing the DOJ is doing. It's on no different terms than what the DOJ is doing. Okay, so then don't say it's different. It's the exact same shit that the DOJ is doing.
Republicans put out the unredacted version.
And so who's being inconsistent? I think the House Republicans are the ones who are saying, but they're selectively but they're selectively releasing victim information. You see how that is? That's selective.
Sure.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, they selectively released that victim information to
So the Democrats who are in line with at least the official DOJ policy. I think this is very different than how you sold it, Michael.
I'm against the partisan chicanery on either side about this.
No, but you're implying chicanery with the Democrats are going along with at least the official DOJ policy. Now, at the time that they released this, I didn't know if the Epstein Files Act was passed, but it's at least consistent with the approach.
DOJ, first of all, the House Oversight Committee is not bound by any DOJ policy.
I know I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying they're in line with it. I'm not saying that they are. I'm just saying it's in line with what the approach is. And
we should wrap up. Yeah, I'm glad that you and I agree that the much preferable, like the exponentially preferable solution to all this would have just to have put into the Epstein Files Transparency Act, release the files, which was I thought was like the slogan for a while, but instead we got release the files and then a million convoluted exceptions that are subject to like a million different interpretations.
Here's maybe a difference is I recognize that there is an interest to protect the victims, but just that it's overborne by the public interest. And I don't think that you're quite so sure. Oh, okay. Then we're aligned on that.
I would weigh the interest in protecting the alleged victim as much less, but like I could imagine like the girl who potentially is victimized in the Palm Beach scenario. Right.
The one victim. I can't believe you don't acknowledge that this Jane is a victim. I mean, that is just wild to me. You're unwilling to say she's a victim.
I mean, I would love to. Can somebody victimize me whereby I get $5 million?
No, that's not the question. That's just a joke. Why is she not a victim?
She probably got around double that.
She was a 14-year-old girl. She's approached by these
Okay, all
right. Hey, Michael, thank you so much for coming through.
Yeah.
Long conversation, really appreciate it. And let's chat again at some point. Maybe there's going to be a development, but yeah, thank you so much again for having me. And yeah, talk soon, okay?
All right, take care, bye.
Later.